3 white fluffy lumps popped out from behind the crystal and started purring. They're called popoi. The guy was sitting next to the crystal, and he was shaking with fear. Questions started popping up in the chat room. The lumps stopped and stared at the boy with wary eyes. Suddenly, one of them opened its little mouth, which turned out to be full of sharp teeth. He jumped back and flew straight at the boy, who was trembling with fear. In the eyes of the poor boy reflected horror. He had already resigned himself to the fact that now these things will eat him. But it wasn't like that. The fluffy things rushed at Crystal and began to devour him with a crackling sound. The guy shivered. Did he have to eat that rock too? The chat was bursting with messages. The boy sighed heavily and swallowed the lump in his throat. He could already imagine how he was going to eat the crystal. Still, he got over himself and ripped off a small piece and began to eat it. They tasted disgusting, like eating sand, but he had no choice now. He would destroy the damn tower. The guy kept eating the rock. The guy was dressed in a neat business suit, a smile shining on his face. He was sitting in a small office in front of a cup of coffee. A woman sat next to him and said that it was hard to find a job now. She drank some coffee and said that since the boy never marry hands, he will succeed in everything he does. The boy, whose name was Jeju, scratched the back of his head and said timidly that it wasn't easy to get the CEO's attention. The woman sighed and dreamily said that if only all boys had such a heart. The boy was embarrassed. The woman sighed heavily again and said that their CEO honestly wasn't feeling too good right now. It's a private organization. The woman's eyes drooped. If the director retires, the orphanage will last 3 years at the most. A chill ran down the guy's spine. Things must be really bad for them. Soon he came to his room. Opening the door, he saw a simple interior, a bed mat, and a large window. Without hesitation, he flopped down on the bed. He was too tired for the day. During this time, he had to try many professions. He worked as a salesman. Until at one of the interviews, he was approved for a job. He was tormented by the thought. It was all useless. Even if he worked 1,000 days at the stall, there would not be enough money to run an orphanage. The boy kept thinking. The orphanage had 3 years left at the most. Is there any way to become rich in that time? The boy opened YouTube and started looking for quick ways to make money, but as usual, everything here turned out to be bullshit. No matter what he looked for, he kept running into the awakened. Nothing. And then he thought, awakened. There's something about it. He clicked on one random video. It was the usual one about how a guy got rich in just a few days. The video interviewed 2 people who had passed the tower and managed to get rich. Asked questions. What was their biggest change after coming back? The man smiled and spread his hands. He said it would sound strange, but the main secret of success. He paused rhetorically. Of course, his secret to success was getting drunk. The boy stared at the whole thing with his eyes wide open. What the hell is this? 7 years ago, a tall tower suddenly appeared in their world. No one knew what to do with it at first. It picked people at random and dragged them away. After that, people weren't seen for a long time. It was horrible. The most important thing is that only a few people could come back from there alive. No one knows what happens there. The most important thing is that the people who came back from there have no comment. The people who came back from the tower are called the awakened. Their bodies contain the mana that has fueled humanity's progress. Magical engineering is a skill that shouldn't exist in the real world. Therefore, the awakened are highly sought after in many companies. The one who could successfully pass the tower becomes a celebrity. The guy was lying on his bed and envied, wished he could find that entrance to the tower. Suddenly, Kim received a notification. His phone buzzed. The guy looked at the screen in surprise. What was it even? The sender was not known. The messages were pouring down like rain. They never stopped coming. And they were quite strange. The guy got goosebumps on his back. What's going on here? Had he been hacked? He decided to delete it for good, not to clog up his phone. But he accidentally clicked on the wrong one. The guy shivered. He was clumsy as well. What if it's a hacking file? We need to knock out the cell phone. He reached for the off button, but noticed something strange. It was like someone was broadcasting live. On the screen appeared a boy who looked just like him. His face was frightened. And then it began to dawn on him that it was him. The face, the voice, the manner of speech. It all belonged to him. But how is that possible? He was apparently fighting someone, waving his weapon. Something was definitely going on. However, he couldn't remember anything. It was all a blur, not a single memory. Suddenly, he saw himself wearing a beautiful black cloak with a black axe in his hands. He looked like some kind of superhero. What kind of video is this? Suddenly, that same furry creature appeared on the screen. Popeye! His copy on the phone freaked out. What the hell is that? Where did that furry animal come from? Suddenly Kim remembered it was the same thing the man from the interview had mentioned. Yes, that furry animal was called a popoi. It eats rocks with its powerful teeth. The boy wondered if that's what that monster was called. Is that why that guy stopped talking about it? He kept looking the whole time. Many different windows of information appeared there. They gave him information about objects. They could also be used to recognize the path. Quite useful stuff, as it turns out. Goosebumps ran down his spine again. The video was getting more and more interesting. It's a video of the future, him conquering the tower. The awakened never talk about the tower. The boy kept looking behind him the whole time. He ran up to the registration table. The portal won't open until 2 years from now. He needs to start in better shape than he saw in that clip. He signed up for the gym. It would be best to study the video so that the tower sweep would go smoothly in the future. Then he went to the store. To work, after all, he needs to get his money from where? The boy had a smile on his face the whole time. He realized to himself that he would conquer the tower. He even started praying, which was becoming more like fanaticism. Every day he prayed that the portal would appear today. So far, however, everything had been unsuccessful. He quit his job last month to wait for the portal to appear, but he still needs money. It's all been useless. The boy sighed heavily and reached for the phone. Had he misunderstood the tower's hint? A chill ran down his back. All hope was crumbling. No, it couldn't be. He shook his head, pushing the bad thoughts away. He thought to himself about that woman. If it was a mistake, their shelter would close. He thought about it. He couldn't let this place go to waste. However, there was less and less time left. He sighed heavily and swallowed the lump in his throat. The guy cried out. Still, he was worrying too much because he didn't know the exact time. It's getting to him. Wouldn't it be better to do some stretching after all? Suddenly, something started to happen. Space began to change, and a purple cloud appeared from somewhere. Kim looked at it, and he didn't understand anything yet. Wind? The portal began to slowly grow larger. Soon it was several times larger. The wind began to rage everywhere, as if a hurricane was about to hit the place. Things started flying around the room. He stood in front of the portal, still not understanding anything. Goosebumps of fear ran down his back. It was starting to dawn on him now. It was a portal. The boy's eyes widened. The abyss appeared in front of him, and a strange voice said only one phrase, "Come in." A smile appeared on his face. Even if he didn't call out, he would still go in. He wouldn't run away. The guy took one step towards the portal. His whole body was shaking with impatience. Finally, after all this time of waiting, it had finally worked. He reached out his hand to the dashboard, but immediately yanked it back, as if afraid of something. Mentally, the boy asked the principal to just wait for him. Let them just wait for him. He pressed the key and prepared himself. His eyes widened. A new path was starting right now. There was a flash before his eyes, and the boy lost consciousness. His eyes opened very slowly. Soon, he did come to his senses. For a few seconds, he didn't realize what was happening or where he was. Then, he jumped up and began to frighteningly turn his head. Where is he? Soon, he looked around and realized that this was the cave from the video. The guy scratched the back of his head. He looked at the small dashboard. It said it was the beginning of the stream, and he wanted to check the video. He didn't have his phone, though. The guy realized he had empty pockets. Okay, that'll be fine. He's been doing nothing but revisiting the video for the last 2 years. On the first floor, contestants are given an hour to prepare. During that hour, they must interact with the audience and get coins from them. Spectators are the other awakened left in the tower, based on the list of streams they see. They pick their favorite and start sponsoring them with coins. It's cool, but it's complicated. And the reason for that is the coins. If a viewer sponsors the stream and a person goes up a floor, they get coins. Or it's possible that the viewer is just bored and has nothing to do, so he's just doing it for fun. Suddenly, the guy saw a user under the nickname Love join the stream. He immediately bowed down and thanked his first viewer. The boy thanked him for the first coin and asked, "Can he spend it in the store?" The spectator laughed. At this point, Kim was very glad he had studied those videos. He thanked the viewer once again. But what would he spend the coin on? The guy thought about it and said that it seems worth waiting. He doesn't know what challenges await him, so he should prepare himself. The viewer liked it and signed up. The guy glowed with happiness and thanked him for subscribing. Great! He didn't even expect to get a coin on the first day. The spectator said he would watch the other guys and disconnected. The boy waved him goodbye. He was in a good mood. Everything was going as it should. A great start. If he keeps this up, he could soon be winning a viewer award. Getting a subscription from a viewer is an incredibly valuable achievement. According to the rules, you can't subscribe to another person until you unsubscribe the first person. On top of that, for every 10,000 subscribers, the person gets a special reward that helps a lot with promotion. He looked at the pop-up. Now, it had 15 views, 7 subscribers, and 37 coins. He reached out. That should be enough. He got a lot of attention just for choosing a high difficulty level. Subscribers and viewers were chatting at this point. They were talking about something the guy didn't understand. It was necessary to play dumb. The guy kept thinking. There was a discussion going on in the chat room. Funny, but if they told him, they would die. Everyone started talking about how they shouldn't ruin his first impression. After all, if the administrator saw this, he would at least expel them from here. He's the reason why information about the tower isn't being spread. The reason why no one is talking about the tower is not because they want to attract information for themselves, but because the administrator is silencing them. Still, the time was almost here, and the boy snapped out of his musings. He stroked his cheeks and slapped himself a few times to regain his composure. He respectfully addressed his viewers. He said he would start getting ready, so he couldn't look at the chat room for now. By the way, user love is back again. The time for preparation is over, and there is a task to destroy the enemies that will just appear. The guy couldn't even imagine what lay ahead of him. Perhaps kobolds, since the portals are quite small. However, no, out of the portal appeared several furry creatures, surprising familiars. 3 furry beasts jumped out of the portal and hopped towards the boy. Another user joined the broadcast, but as soon as he recognized that the boy had chosen a high difficulty level, he immediately disconnected. Kim already knew that popoi were creatures that looked cute on the outside, but their teeth were strong enough to chew through tough metals. Dangerous creatures. They are true masters at finding those who have killed a member of their species. The onlookers got excited as soon as they saw these furry creatures. The boy, however, continued to stare at them. Such a reaction is not surprising. Every spectator has stumbled upon them at least once. The boy continued to make a fool of himself and asked if these things were really dangerous. The audience began to answer in the affirmative. The guy licked his lips and nodded his head. Fine. The user with the nickname Love left stream again. The guy froze in a daze, needed to think. There shouldn't have been 3 popoi on the first floor at once. It was too much. He tried to remember the behavior of these creatures, so I wouldn't get in trouble. They don't attack first. The animals didn't seem to react to him at all. The guy bent down and looked. Do they even see him? He stepped a little closer to them to get a closer look. The animals didn't seem to react to him at all. One of them jumped over his leg and galloped further around the crystal. The guy's eyes widened. These animals are pretty smart. They're definitely aware of his presence, but they're not doing anything yet, just watching him with a wary eye. He moved even closer to them, but was careful not to arouse suspicion. He made the decision to mimic their behavior so that these monsters would mistake him for their ally. At this time, a discussion was going on in the chat room. People were starting to get frustrated. They had originally found him amusing, but so far the place was boring. Everyone started to disengage. However, the guy wasn't going to back down. He would act as he intended and only fight as a last resort. At this time, one of the spectators was watching him through the monitor, sitting in his office. One of the participants fought with goblins. This caused a great excitement among the spectators. The same person sitting in his office smiled. This guy is pretty smart, so we should give him a subscription. He wanted to click on the subscribe button, but it was impossible because he was already subscribed to someone else. The man smiled, so the kid in the cave is still alive. Wait a minute, is there more viewers than there were? The rookie still hasn't died. All they did was jump around the crystal and make a funny sound. Poi. They kept jumping, and they seemed to be contemplating attacking. So far the beasties were doing nothing. Kim started jumping with them to become part of their pack. The onlookers began to laugh in amazement. This was something they hadn't seen before. Suddenly, the guy saw that a user named Love sponsored him with 10 coins and sent a voice message. Usually, these brutes quench their needs with stones. Their favorite mineral is mana stone. It's used to make magical devices or simply jewelry, a valuable material. They perform a ritual of sorts when they find rare food. But these wary creatures, if an intruder approaches, they'll circle around the food instead of eating it. But now, they even invited him to their meal, so he can't refuse. The guy thought that he understands their feelings now, so there's nothing to fear for now. Right now, they are happy. A cold sweat of fear settled down his face. It was only a matter of time before he made a mistake, and these cute animals would tear him to shreds. A drop of sweat fell to the ground. The sound seemed the loudest in the world to him. The critters became wary and looked at the guy. They began to growl. Why, Opening their huge mouths and putting their fangs forward, they lunged right at him. The guy stood there and didn't move so as not to annoy them. Disgusting creatures. Suddenly, one of them bounced off the ground and flew straight at him. The guy was almost speechless with fear. Are these things going to eat him now? However, something else happened. They pounced on Crystal and began to devour him with a crunch. The chat room continued to chat. The guy shuddered. Did he need to eat that stone too? Something like that. He touched the stone. It was warm and even pulsed a little. The poor guy swallowed the lump in his throat and imagined eating the stone. There was no choice, so he broke off a piece of the stone and began to eat it. It was terribly unpleasant in his mouth. The chat room couldn't believe their eyes. However, eating the stone was not so difficult. It melts in the mouth like chocolate. In addition, as it turned out, it tasted pleasant, as if the energy paged throughout the body. He continued crunching the stone, along with his new friends, if you could call it that. Shards of stone began to fall to the ground. The guy had had enough and couldn't put any more in him. The glow of excessive magical energy, he had honestly seen it for the first time. The onlookers were shocked to see something like this for the first time. The guy's body continued to glow a bright blue color. The guy continued to glow, and the furry Fluffy was jumping around him, and seemed to be happy too. The humans seemed to realize that these critters were doing this while attacking. One of them jumped straight at the boy. However, the opposite happened. Instead of attacking and tearing him up, the critters leaned against him and started purring. The onlookers were shocked. A notice immediately appeared in front of the boy. He raised his eyes and looked. He had completed the challenge. Kim couldn't believe he'd done it, and he had popovers in his arms. He survived. That's all the guy thought before he passed out. The poor guy crashed to the ground, and the Fluffies flew right after him. He'd overworked himself, or overeaten that rock. Someone was already watching him with wonder. His eyes opened, and the first thing he saw in front of him was the 3 Fluffies staring at him. He jerked in fright, and the Popoi bounced away from him. The guy was terrified. Had he been knocked out? But why? What had happened? The Popoi looked at him with their huge blue eyes. They seemed to consider him a member of their family now. Kim looked at them with surprised eyes and jabbed her finger at herself and asked them if they were worried about him. Popeye jumped up and down in joy, which seemed to be an affirmative answer. The guy looked at them with a good-natured look, and his new pets jumped up to him. He stroked his new Fluffy. Its fur was very soft and pleasant to the touch. The chat at this time was bursting with messages. It was the first time the audience had seen someone go through the ordeal in this way. Kim noticed this too late and coughed and greeted his viewers. The chat is going so fast, he doesn't even have time to read how many viewers are there. But suddenly he saw the number, 127 viewers. He was horrified. How did this even happen? 127 people. This was a phenomenal number that he hadn't even hoped to get. Not so fast. The guy started to play to the audience and pretend that if it wasn't for the audience, he definitely wouldn't be able to pull it off. He thought, as it turned out, these stones were mana crystals, and these Fluffies are using them to satisfy their hunger. People started asking in the chat room, how did he do it? The guy was embarrassed by his answer, which they weren't going to like. However, he took one Fluffy in his arms and said that he wanted to be friends with them because he realized that he would die if he attacked them. Popeye grinned. Although, didn't the job description say to eliminate enemies? On the other hand, why kill them? He could make them his allies. If he wanted to get along with these creatures, he had to understand them first. So it's just a matter of following their lead. Tensed up again, even if they didn't believe him, but they had already let it go. Gotta live up to the newcomer's image. He and the 3 Fluffies went to the second floor where the portal was already prepared. They started asking him if he had forgotten anything. There are awards here. The guy raised an eyebrow in surprise. Yes, here are the awards. He pointed his finger at the screen, and from there immediately began to appear a gift of symbolic wrapping. It was a plain white box, tied with a red ribbon. Root smiled and said he would open it now. He removed the lid. There was a ticket, a pebble, and a pouch of what looked like gold. He took the pebble and took a closer look. This reward was different from the one he'd seen. Instead of a sword, he got stones. As soon as they saw the stones, they rushed at the boy with their little mouths open. He even got a little scared. Stop! Where are they going? The fuzzies were just jumping on him. The usual mana stone is bright and blue. This one is not like that. It's completely different. So the onlookers haven't noticed yet. In the store, starting on the 10th floor. But such stones are too wasteful to give to pets. He put out his hand, ordering the fuzzies to move away. He'll give you something better a little later. Meanwhile, the onlookers were talking amongst themselves. How is he going to verify information about the subject? He continued to make a fool of himself as an inexperienced newcomer, so he picked up a ticket and stared at it intently. It was a voucher for a free nickname change. He could change his nickname once for free. But why did this thing show up on the first floor? The guy slipped it into his pocket and said to put it away for now. It can be used after the 5th floor. Then he pulled out a bag of coins. It was pretty heavy. Well, that's too standard. They give them to everyone. The chat continued to discuss the actions of their streamer. After dealing with all the rewards, the guy cheerfully said he was going to the 2nd floor. The Popoi lay on the floor in front of him. Turning around, the boy went straight for the portal while the fluffies looked around the cave. Suddenly, one of them tensed up and quickly jumped somewhere so fast that boy didn't even have time to notice it. The rest of his fellows watched their friend with their little mouths open. Kim stretched his arm forward in an attempt to stop him, but it seemed too late. The guy scratched the back of his head and asked naively if anyone knew why they were acting like that. The chat room replied that they didn't know anything. Meanwhile, the 3 fluff balls had approached the wall and were jumping around near it. The guy got closer and saw the fluffies looking exactly at the stone wall, as if there was something there. Suddenly, one of them opened its wide maw and prepared to attack. The chat room was horrified. The Popoi began to gnaw on the wall. The chat suggested that this was a protest against the player for not giving them those glowing pebbles. Soon, they gnawed a small hole in the wall and snuck right in. Then, as if they were inviting the boy to follow them, he looked down into the black hole. He didn't really want to go in there, but if his friends were inviting him in, why not? He turned to his chat and said he was going to go get his pets. He had a smile on his face. He kept moving through the narrow tunnel. It was quite uncomfortable and uncomfortable, but he kept moving forward. People started to resent and even sympathize with him, but it was painful to watch. But the guy said he was fine. Besides, he wasn't really in pain. It felt like the protruding rocks were giving him a light massage. The chat room started saying, "When's he going to get there?" The boy said he would speed up. But suddenly, he felt that either the tunnel was getting bigger or it was getting smaller. But more likely the second. The boy shrank. As soon as he realized this, he immediately cried out in surprise and fear. How is this even possible? What's happening to him? His entire body began to gradually glow a bright blue color, as if it was a mana crystal. Well, he shrank. It's the same feeling as when he ate the stone. One must continue on the path and move on. The guy continued to crawl forward. The guy crawled along the narrow corridor and tried not to pay attention to anything, though the sensation in his body was strange. The 5th floor was known as the Profession Change Room. It's where users choose their path. Knights specialize in Mideast combat and have advanced powers. Mages specialize in a wide range of magic and communication. You can also become a magical engineer, useful in any field, but you can only choose something one of the 3. There are also non-martial professions. This power that he activated right now is similar to the power of a knight who strengthens his body with the aura within them. The guy gradually moved forward, clenching his whole body. He saw the exit. There were already Popoi there. They were talking about something in their own language. The boy climbed out of the narrow passage and came out, but only halfway. He crawled up with a fluffy and asked, "What's going on in there?" They were looking at something. There was a lodestone, a rather rare artifact, and by the looks of it, very valuable. It was glowing. The chat room started laughing. Even these fluffies are showing him the way. The boy examined the object. He dropped to his knees and screamed, "No!" The fluffies started going crazy all around him. He looked closer and saw the characteristics. It was a rare level talisman necklace. It was said to bring good luck. As soon as the guy saw it, his eyes widened in surprise. The chat started to say indignantly that he was a cheater. One look was enough to determine that this item is good. The guy took a closer look. He remembered the video where he himself used this talisman to survive on the 15th floor. This item is obtained after the minimum floor. Except the problem is that it's too early. The boy squirmed. His stream had been sponsored for 10 coins again, plus the user love. He sent him a voicemail too. In it, he told the guy to make a mascot. The guy obeyed and put his mascot around his neck. Nice. It raised their interest. Mentally thanked this user. Then, he turned back to the chat again and said he was going to crawl back up and go back to the portal. He was about to crawl back when he saw the glow and was stunned. There was nowhere to go. The portal appeared right there in front of him. He was holding little furry animals in his hands. That's right. Let them come with him. They didn't seem to mind and started rubbing against his cheeks. Well, that's settled then. The boy coughed and prepared to step into the portal. There was already a discussion in the chat room. The guy had a suspiciously high number of top items. Well, He got ready and took the first step towards the second floor, now in the company of his furry friends. There was nothing left to do, just step through that portal. The boy had already lifted his foot. His body began to absorb the blue glow. A moment more, and there he was, already on the second floor. The portal completely engulfed him and opened up on the second floor, which was very different from what he had seen. First, his foot emerged from the portal, and then he himself. First, for some reason, a strong wind hit him in the face, and he squeezed his eyes shut. Kim raised his head and looked forward in surprise. If this is what he thought, how did he get here? The boy stood in front of a large and tall tower, the very same tower that towered into the sky. He opened his eyes wide and began to look around in amazement. The place was incredibly spacious. He needed to look around first. The guy opened the chat board and began to look around. On the walls, he noticed inscriptions in some incomprehensible language. The guy tried to read, but he was weak. Thank God there was a translator here. On the wall was written, "Remember the prosummer and the blood of those who are called heroes." He grinned at what he read. A little creepy. Then he looked to the side. There was another plaque. He looked closer and read another inscription. "There is both nobility and no honor in effort, so don't think all effort is the same." Right. There was, after all, because in his world, he had been born with a dirty spoon. He had nothing. But still, effort was still effort, and it was better to try than not to try at all. He stepped closer and opened another plaque with an inscription on it. It said the challenge would begin in 10 minutes. You have to survive for 30 minutes against the monsters. He wondered, 10 minutes? Something was too little time to prepare. He decided to check the store first to buy some needed items for gear. The chat continued to laugh, but the boy didn't seem to be paying attention at all since this was a high difficulty. If he was unlucky enough to get red bears, it would be bad. If not, 2 sea snakes. The red bear's whole body in flames. He can spit fire. Yes, and he's gigantic himself. It's pretty hard to stand against. Sea serpents may seem very intimidating at first glance, but without water, they can do nothing. One would have to avoid the tail. He clamped his eyes shut. The hope that everything would go as needed did not leave him. There was a good chance that things would not go according to plan here either. But he tried to keep the bad thoughts away. No, it would be fine. They wouldn't give him an impassable ordeal on the second floor. Eventually, the trial began. A small portal began to loom in front of him. The guy got ready. The portal was so small. Could it be a sea snake? Not so. It started to get bigger, so is it a red bear? The chat room was also starting to anticipate a fight. The portal kept getting bigger and bigger. It became so huge that the boy got goosebumps. He was looking at a huge portal that was much bigger than the ones he had seen in the video. It was simply enormous. What was going to come out of there? The boy stood there, unable to move from his seat out of fear. Had the portal gotten too big? The boy looked at it with astonishment. Suddenly, a horrible guess visited his head. It just couldn't be. His eyes widened. The portal began to open, and a huge green feet appeared from there. There was a rumbling sound. Some huge monster was coming straight out of the portal. A real monster appeared from there. It was a huge turtle. It opened its mouth and roared. It was a dragon turtle. The poor man stood in front of it and stared with his eyes open. He started frantically searching the dashboard for anything. The worst of all things he had envisioned had happened. At the store, he decided to buy a large axe, at least some kind of weapon. He bought a rare axe. This thing would probably be able to help, at least hold this thing back. He prepared to jump. When he killed monsters during the live broadcast, he would get a hidden reward. The turtle looked at him with its burning red eyes, and a roar was heard. The monster was furious. Go! The guy ran at it straight ahead. The chat room was surprised by such an act. He ran too close, and the turtle had already raised its huge leg to crush the annoying guy. There was a rumbling sound. She stepped right on the spot where he was standing. Was he dead? The smoke was starting to slowly clear, and a silhouette appeared there. He had survived, after all. He concentrated in time and hit the turtle with the axe. The axe got stuck in its skin, and now the guy was hanging from its body. He wanted to climb on its back, but it was unclear how much power he got from the stone. The turtle saw him, and her eyes lit up with renewed vigor. Now she was truly furious. With a roar, it opened its wide mouth, and a beam of energy began to erupt from it. Lee swung his axe and still managed to knock the beam away. He landed on the ground, breathing heavily. The impact was incredibly strong. One more second, and he would have been torn apart. The guy smiled and realized that he could kill it after all. Then the hidden reward would be in his pocket. The monster apparently didn't expect his victim to be so tough. She growled and pointed her eyes at him. The guy started moving with incredible speed, pushing off her legs. Paused then, needing to immobilize her. He grasped his axe and began to chop her down. The boy swung his weapon to deliver a precise blow, his furry pets perched on his shoulder. It wasn't too hard to hit the turtle. He hit it right in the leg, and blood spurted from the wide wound. The turtle roared in pain. Its mouth was full of sharp teeth. It could have easily torn the guy apart, but he was too fast. It swung its foot in again to finally crush its victim, but the guy deftly dodged. It was necessary to move in such a way that the turtle couldn't know his next move either. He looked at the monster with his back. From afar, the turtle looked even more intimidating. It had huge spikes on its shell. Most likely, the turtle was thinking of how to catch the guy, however, he was moving too fast. Suddenly, she began to hide in her shell, most likely to strengthen her defenses. Soon, her paws and head went completely under her shell, and the turtle began to glow with a green light. This is the healing mode. The reason why it's so hard to defeat the dragon turtle is because of its fighting style. Its armor is very dense. The guy stood in front of it and pondered on how he would have to defeat it if it had such a defense. There was only one option. He pushed himself off the ground and flew straight at her back. He was moving incredibly fast, so she didn't have to worry about her safety just yet. In a moment, he was already on her back. The guy charged his hand with power and grabbed hold of one of her spikes. He needed to pull it out of its shell. Great. He'd managed to win the moment, and getting on its back would be much easier now. People who fight this kind of monster usually climb on its back, but the spikes glow red and explode. Needing to find a weak spot, he moved forward. The guy ran along the shell and waited for the turtle to activate again. A user under the nickname Love said that the spikes were exploding, and he needed to get down from there immediately. Soon, he found the right spot. There was a small spike that was much smaller than all the others. This must be the weak spot. He swung his axe to finally finish the thing off in one blow. There could be no mistake. There was a cracking sound. He hit the target. The spike started to crack. Probably it wasn't very strong. It didn't work the first time. He would have to try again. He put even more force into the next strike. One more punch. The spike started to crack and broke. The guy held his trophy and prepared for the next throw. In the chat, everyone fell silent in anticipation. Turtle started to show his head. This is his chance. We need to hit it right there. The monster shifted his eyes to his victim and roared. Now the turtle was ready to devour him. The turtle began to accelerate and run straight into the wall. It wanted to throw the kid off by all means. This was his last chance. He gripped the spike tightly in his hands and tried to jam it into the shell. He begged for it to work. The kid swung the axe to hit the spike that was sticking out of the shell. A thud was heard. The air began to be infused with electricity. It seemed he was beginning to shift. The turtle felt a great pain. Opening its mouth, it began to roar and kick. The spike went off like a bomb. An explosion was heard, and a cloud of dust rose into the air. What was that now? The people watching the broadcast were puzzled. No one understood what was happening, because no player has not yet thought of such a thing. Everyone thought the guy was dead. But no, at the last moment he managed to jump off the shell and ended up on Earth. The dust started to clear. The guy was alive. Everyone else started screaming that they had originally believed in him. Now, such a strong explosion, even the sturdy turtle couldn't withstand it. Now, the monster was defeated. He stood in front of the turtle's corpse and breathed heavily on it. The fight was very difficult. He could barely make it through. The guy's heart was still pounding hard with excitement. While he was standing on the turtle's back, the guy realized something. The experience of just watching the broadcasts and still played out. This spike explodes when you fill it with manu, so you could make a homemade bomb. He'll pour the mana he got from absorbing the stone into it. That should be enough. Besides, he'll then stick it in its shell to take that turtle down, should work. And the moment he struck with his axe, the spike went off like a detonator, causing an explosion. The guy shuddered as he remembered it. He almost died himself. There was still a rumbling in his head. He turned his eyes again to the dead turtle, which even in this state was frightening. Still, it wasn't dead yet. It barely moved its eyes and looked up at the boy. It was time to finish. He took up his axe and approached the turtle to finish it off. The axe soared through the air and a crunch was heard. The challenge was over. He received an additional reward. The poutine, the next floor, was opened. The guy looked up to the sky with gratitude. Yes, he was able to get the reward. The Poppies were happy too. They jumped around their master and purred happily. He looked at his friends and asked, "They seem to be hungry, right?" So he had an idea. Monsters usually accumulate and store mana. For these creatures, the dragon turtle is like a huge block of mana. Well, the guy nodded and said they could eat it. The fuzzies immediately went for their prey. The chat room wondered if they understood what he was saying. The nubbins began to devour the corpse of the turtle. It looked disgusting, to say the least. The guy and himself shuddered at the sight. After all, these cute fluffies are quite dangerous creatures. Meanwhile, the chat started accusing him of being a cheater, of playing unfairly. It was getting on his nerves. After all, the excuse of luck would sound implausible. People were already starting to guess something. All right, we've got to go for broke. He said he just wanted to try it, and suddenly it worked. It's a lame explanation, but there was no other way. His viewers watch him because they play along. They watch his stream because of the terrifying difficulty. They're interested in watching people overcome challenges, and the number of viewers is proof of that. To think that almost 200 people are watching it. A smile appeared on his face. He was happy with his result after all. First, he had to check the awards. He opened the tab to check the items. He got several rewards at once, a hidden one, and for reaching 100 subscribers. He first decided to look at the reward for passing the floor. There would probably be something valuable there. As soon as he clicked on the icon, a symbolic gift immediately appeared. It flopped to the ground and immediately opened. Something began to glisten there, the onlookers staring at the screen. The guy received an ordinary level coin sack and a rare level spatial backpack, the invention of a genius magic engineer. He picked up his rewards and began to examine it. The coins were standard level rewards. That was to be expected. The backpack, on the other hand, he got lucky, so that's not bad. He took the mana stone in his hands and thought it would be best if he didn't show the description of the item. He stashed the crystal in his backpack. The mana stones would come in handy when he got to the 10th floor. He opened the panel. Need to set up another topic of conversation before they started discussing the stone. The guy said, "Now we need to look at the hidden reward." The stone flew straight into his backpack. The chat started discussing that he treats rare items like that. It seems like he's just taunting. The next reward appeared. It was some kind of stone with a symbol painted on it. It was an enhancement rune. Furthermore, it was of heroic rank. A good thing to keep for now. The guy decided to hide it in his bag as well. Everyone suggested using this rune on their axe. As soon as the guy heard that, it was as if everything in his head went fuzzy. Somehow he felt bad. His head began to spin. His thoughts became confused, and he felt like someone had hit him on the head. He tried to find the next reward, but his head was all jumbled up. He felt like he'd been poisoned by something. For his 100 subscribers, he received the blessing of all characteristics. That's a pretty good start. These were the kind of passive skills that wouldn't do badly in battle. Out of all of them, mana helped mages and magic engineers the most. However, he chose something else. Guy pressed the confirm button. He chose his blessing. Everyone started discussing. It's useless if he doesn't want to be a mage. The onlookers were shocked. However, the boy didn't listen to them, but was thinking about something of his own with his eyes blissfully closed. He paid no attention to anyone at all. Unlike mages and knights who are strong from the start, the path of magical engineers is thorny and difficult. Usually, these kind of people are not seen as combat units, but rather support or something like that. On the other hand, he's only at the very beginning, so who knows how things will turn out next time. The guy smiled. He distinctly remembered that guy from the video, that he was basically not bad looking. Except he had a magic gauntlet that he used to vaporize his enemies. Powerful weapon. This guy was a true genius on the battlefield. Plus, he was also a magical engineer, so it was an obvious choice. The guy clenched his fists and said that real men know that explosions are cool. He was over the moon. He called his pets over to him, and Fluffy jumped up to him. Of course, he wouldn't be able to create his own magic weapon like that genius. The boy lifted one Fluffy in his arms, and he smiled affectionately at his master. He was incredibly cute and soft. The pets flocked to him and began to rub their soft, round bodies against him. At that moment, the boy felt really happy. He was starting to do well, even though he didn't try hard enough. These little guys easily ate a dragon turtle. What an appetite they have. Well, it was time for them to go. The guy was exhausted. He had spent too much energy fighting this turtle. He needed to take a break. He stepped through the portal and went to the next level. The next floor was much bigger. There were majestic buildings like ancient Greek temples. Much better. He felt so much better now. The guy clenched and unclenched his fists. Now, he looked refreshed. It seemed like he was well rested. Everyone in the chat room continued to watch his ascent. Suddenly, a sign appeared in front of him, saying that the third floor trial was about to begin. The Garden of the Great Ancient God. It was necessary to defeat the defenders. The boy pondered. The first and second floors were much more difficult than he had seen, but the third seemed to be little different. He continued to study the table. If the third floor was of the same difficulty, it would not be easy. Suddenly, he heard someone's loud and ringing voice. It seemed to be another player thanking his donator. As it happened, a boy about his age appeared from another portal and smiled. Kim looked at him warily, who knew what to expect from him. The stranger looked at him in the same frightened voices. He probably didn't expect to meet anyone here either. Perhaps the difficulty is higher here and it requires teamwork? The stranger continued to stare at him. They continued to stand across from each other, staring at each other with uncomprehending looks. Kim looked at him in disbelief. Maybe this would be his opponent. He looked at the guy. He looked shabby, and it looked like the second floor had not been easy for him. Kim held out his hand to greet him and said hello. They shook hands. This kid's hand was strong, though it was still trembling with tension. As soon as they shook hands, the kid put his arm around him, and with tears in his eyes, asked him he was a streamer too, right? The poor guy immediately let go of him and apologized for his assertiveness. His reaction was justified because it was probably the first time he'd met the man. The kid started crying. It looked like he was having a hard time. He said with tears in his eyes that he had no experience at all. He put his hand to his chest and said his name was Ha Young-suk. Kim looked at him and introduced himself too. He didn't have confidence in this kid yet, after all. As soon as the stranger heard his name, he immediately said, "She was pretty funny." The boy shuddered. He'd been told that a lot. Ha looked away and was embarrassed. He seemed embarrassed. He timidly asked what was on his shoulders. "It was a popoi, right?" Kim smiled and nodded his head. Did the audience enlighten him? Ha nodded his head and smiled. "Yes, the onlookers are just freaking out. They don't understand what these animals are doing here." Kim smiled and replied, "It just so happens that they are now with them from the first floor." Ha looked at him with a surprised look and started to say something. However, their conversation was interrupted by a rumble. The ground under their feet began to shake. Something very large and apparently dangerous was approaching him. Suddenly, the boys saw some huge block of stone moving towards them. They froze in place, unable to move. Kim said it seemed like they needed to talk later. The kid next to him was just terrified. Something very large and very heavy had crashed a few dozen meters away from them. The assumptions were the worst. Yes, it was the guards. Two huge statues made of pure stone landed right in front of them. Kim looked ahead. Even the difficulty, that is, the weaknesses of these ones would be the same. These two guards, guarding the entrance to the third floor. It is said that the real difficulty starts right here. On low difficulty, there will be one statue. On medium difficulty, there will be two. And on high, there will be two as well. He clenched his axe in his hands, though it was unlikely that this thing would help him deal with these stone hulks. He looked at the guards in front of him with a serious gaze, and the ground shook from their footsteps. If one didn't overpower two at the same time, they would come to life, and it would last indefinitely. Suddenly, the eyes of one of the guards glowed red. Now he was preparing to attack. Here we go. The huge stone statue raised its weapon to crush the boys in one fell swoop. There was a rumble. The guardian thrust his spear straight into the ground, and with his force, the earth began to crack. His strength was tremendous. Dust flew in different directions. The guys managed to bounce to a safe distance at the last moment. Ha flew back a few meters and landed on the ground. He didn't expect this the first time. The poor guy immediately started looking for his comrade. He was incredibly scared. Kim ran straight at the statues. He seemed to have lost his mind. He came dangerously close, and one of the guards had already brought his huge shield to crush him. There was a rumbling sound, and the guard lowered his huge shield right onto the ground, seeming to crush the guy. Ha-Tu thought so too, and was horrified. He thought his comrade had been crushed. The guard raised his shield and prepared for the next blow. His eyes continued to burn. However, there was no one at the point of impact, only the cracked earth. The boy managed to slip away. Kim, holding his axe in his hands, approached the guard from behind. The boy pushed himself off the ground and flew upward to strike. He landed right on the guard's leg to chop it up. It was necessary to deny these statues the ability to move. Charging his axe, the guy struck. The leg began to crack. The statue staggered and fell to one knee. The guy who was watching from the sidelines marveled at such strength. Suddenly, the second guard reached out to his fellow guard to help. They began to help each other, and that posed a problem. There was no way to defeat them this way. Kim stood and prepared. There was no time. That statue would come back to life if nothing was done to the second one. He couldn't let those two be revived all the time. The boy bit his tongue. He got ready and made a dash. He ran straight at the statues to chop the two down in one fell swoop. Once he got close enough, he struck the axe again at the legs. If they fell this way, it would be easier. Another blow. It needed more power. He charged his axe even harder and swung for another strike. There was no margin for error. The blow was really powerful. There was a crunching sound, and stone chips flew in different directions. It hit him in the leg. The statues started to fall down. He was just in time, so now he just had to finish them off. 2 statues were already on the ground. It couldn't be better. It's done. There was a rumble of impact, and clouds of dust rose into the air. Soon, it began to disperse, and a leg, or rather its stump, appeared. I think it's out. The guy looked at the defeated enemies. He had to aim again and finish what he had started. The 2 guards were lying on the ground, seemingly unmoving. Ha already ran to his comrade, waving his arms. He was terrified. As soon as the guy saw what Kim had done to the guards, a chill ran down his spine. Who was he anyway? The eyes of the guards had gone out. They didn't seem to move and were no longer a threat, but something was still wrong. Kim noticed at the last minute that something was wrong. The guard's eyes suddenly lit up. He's still alive. He immediately shouted to the kid to run away. Look out! The boy didn't seem to be listening to him but was staring off into the distance. That bastard, he's distracted. The boy heard the scream at the last minute, but it was too late. It seemed that something irreparable was about to happen. The boy turned around and at the last moment saw a huge spear flying at him. It was too late. Kim put out his hand to prevent the inevitable, but he wouldn't have been able to do it in time. The spear was accelerating at an unbelievable speed. 1 second more, and the boy would be gone. He grabbed his comrade and threw him aside. A centimeter away from them, there was an explosion. The guys were on the ground, breathing heavily. It was very close. The guards began to rise. They were approaching the guys, already on their knees. It was still just beginning. This seemed to make them angry, their eyes burning red with rage. Kim looked at them with frightened eyes. Now that's bad. Who knew they would throw a spear? Turns out it wasn't enough to just drop them to the ground. Gotta end this. He drew his weapon. The guards were on their feet, preparing for the next attack. Kim prepared himself. While the spectators admired him, they didn't expect the guy to have so much strength. He pushed himself off the ground and flew straight at them. He had to finish them off, or they wouldn't rest. He pushed himself off the ground and flew up and jumped on one of the guards. He was standing a few centimeters away from the monster. 1 more second, and it looked like he would be finished. The guy held on with his hands to keep from falling to the ground. He clutched his axe tightly in his hands. 1 more jump to get to him. Need to finish them off immediately. Pushing off the ground, he flew straight at them again. It was a frontal attack, a real madness. He only had 1 chance. He pushed off the rock and flew straight into their faces. He charged his entire body with mana and put all his power into this strike. With only a few meters between them, the guard looked up at him and the boy continued to fly at him. There was a cracking sound. The blow went straight into the guard's shoulder. The boy had done his best. The arm he hit immediately snapped off with a crack and fell to the ground. Then the guard broke in 2. His body was literally crushed. The top part of his body fell to the ground. The second guard was already reaching out his hands to crush the boy, his rage growing. Kim jumped back just in time, and the guard grabbed hold of his comrade with his hand. The boy was going down, right into the hands of this monster. No way to dodge, but what to do? He had no time to think. He had to act quickly, or he would die. He had to finish it off before the defeated statue was revived. He didn't have much strength left. He had to finish it off. He swung his axe to finish what he had already started. He jumped up straight towards the guard who was already preparing to smash him. After flying a few more meters, the guy brought his axe down, right on his arm. A cracking sound was heard. A huge, deep crack appeared right on the guardian's arm, which began to spread further and further. The monster began to fall. His arm fell off at once. He fell lower and lower. The guy landed on the ground with a miracle. He got to his feet and staggered. Behind his back, a rumbling sound was heard. The guardian was falling to the ground and raising clouds of dust. Soon he was defeated, his body crumpled, and he lay on the ground almost motionless. Soon his red eyes went out. It seemed to be the end. The guy passed the test. After the spectators saw how skillful he was, they immediately started sponsoring him. He scratched the back of his head. The task had been difficult, admittedly, but he had done it. He ironically asked his audience, had he made them wait too long? They were surprised. They hadn't even had time to boil their food. He started to swivel his head in different directions, but still he didn't see the portal to the next floor. Where is it? He's too good at fighting, so it's worth pretending he doesn't know anything. The guy who was next to him held out his hand to him. Kim looked at him with surprised eyes, though it was clear that the guy was in shock. Ha really was stunned. He asked if they could talk for a while. Kim didn't feel like doing that. He would waste too much time as it was. He waved his hand at him, and with a brilliant smile on his lips, said that maybe another time, and immediately ran off. Ha was left alone, and seemed to realize that he had been tricked. There was a passageway ahead, but they had to climb the steps. The battlefield looked pretty creepy. Kim walked up the steps. There had to be a portal somewhere. There was a folio on the table. It was wrapped in a tube. The boy walked closer and unwrapped it. There was some writing. The boy began to read frantically. We awaited our destruction, the cries of starving men, and the spirits of fallen soldiers roamed the empire. The year 957 of the Astrodome Empire. The mad ruler triumphantly proclaimed the beheading of a young general returning from war. The reason was simple. He didn't listen and was executed for it. If you are a wanderer reading this text, one piece of advice: never the emperor. Kim smiled, though goosebumps ran down his back. Well, obviously, he must not understand the meaning of this text now. A portal began to appear next to him. The guy turned his head in its direction. First, before entering, he had to check the reward. He opened the control panel and started reading. A small gift, wrapped in the same red ribbon, fell into his hands a second later. He opened the box. There was a bag of coins, the same standard reward. There was nothing else there. Frustrated, he pulled out the bag of coins and grimaced. However, it wasn't that simple. There were 5,000 coins in that pouch. From something like that, the guy opened his mouth in surprise. Well, now things are changing. It's pretty good. A smile appeared on his face. He already had 211 viewers and 138 subscribers. The increase in viewers was probably because he and that guy were streaming together. 5,600 coins. If it's only coins on the 5th, then there's more to learn about magical engineering. Suddenly, an audience member asked if his pets were too quiet. The guy turned his attention to them. Yes, indeed, the fluffies looked completely emaciated. Their little bodies had literally turned into little pancakes. Guy looked at them fearfully and crouched down in front of the animals. They seemed to be sick. There was obviously something wrong with them. The usually cheerful and lively animals now looked completely emaciated. Does anyone know why they were acting like this? The boy looked up for a clue. Someone in the chat suggested that maybe they were just hungry. The guy wondered. That would make sense. However, no. They ate an entire shell on the second floor after all. How could they be hungry? He rummaged through his bag to check a few things just in case. We'd have to use this stone after all. He took out a small pebble and brought it up to his pets. They were still lying on the floor. He brought it closer to them, but they didn't react at all. He scratched the back of his head. No, it wasn't that they were hungry. Something had happened. Suddenly, he got a message. The user love again sponsored him with a few coins and suggested that he needed to get to the 5th floor first. Suddenly, he had an idea, right? There is someone on the 5th floor who can look at them after all. He picked them up in his arms and decided that he needed to get to the 5th floor as soon as possible, more like the 4th floor. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. It was the same kid who was running towards him and begging him to wait. He was running as fast as he could. Something seemed to be bothering him. He was begging the kid to stop and wait for him. Kim looked at him and said that he had an emergency here, so what did he need? The guy moved closer to him and scratched the back of his head. He said he realized he was getting on his nerves, but he had a request. He decided he should thank his savior after all. The boy bowed immediately. He smiled so casually that it even felt good. This guy is so stuffy. Kim was stunned. What was he doing? A blush of embarrassment even appeared on his cheeks. The guy coughed. He smiled and quickly came to his senses. The guy said that he was glad to help. Perhaps they would see each other again someday. Ha glowed with happiness and nodded his head. Exactly. Kim went straight into the portal, leaving the boy there. He walked through the portal and found himself in a completely different place. There were some brick walls all around this place. The kid didn't let his pets out of his hands. He looked around and saw that there were some strange buttons on the walls. The test of the 4th floor begins. This is a temple sealed with a rune. Break the seal and open the door. 6 hours to go. Kim almost fainted. What a bummer. Of course, they put it more blandly, but it basically means he's going to die. Even if he spends his coins on food, it won't last long. To stay here is to die. He walked closer and began to look around the walls. He was the only one in this room so far. It was a bit empty inside. He left his pets and walked over to one of the walls. There were some strange symbols that were hard to decipher. It seemed there must be somewhere around 1,000 crystals for high difficulty. He began to scrutinize the walls. He decided to check out what the store would offer him. The guy started rummaging around, looking for some item he needed. There was an adjustment of the offerings according to the user's floor. So far, only one food was falling out for him. He doesn't really need it right now, so it's best not to spend any coins yet. Besides, he didn't have that many. He looked at his fluffies, and his heart squeezed. He wanted to save them for later, if he could use them anywhere. The boy walked to the wall. On the 4th floor, he needs to study the inscriptions on the crystals to understand the meaning and find the right color. These crystals change color just by touching them. He reached up and pressed one of the crystals. A symbol appeared on it, and the crystal lit up red. That was the second rule. To think that this caused him difficulty, he even got a little angry at himself. Then, there was the next crystal. The guy also reached out to it and touched it. The crystal also lit up, only now it was green in color. It had another obscure symbol on it. I almost melted from trying to memorize all these inscriptions I'd never seen before. Eventually, I came to the point where I replaced the writing with numbers, so it was easier to remember. Now, it's going to be harder. The boy touched another crystal. After he pressed the crystal, a completely different one lit up, already blue. The really annoying part of this floor is that some crystal can spontaneously change color. But to him, it's just an annoying Rubik's Cube to be assembled. He began to click on the crystals, which immediately began to light up in different colors. The chat started laughing. It seems like he's just clicking them like that. However, the guy didn't pay any attention to them. He just kept doing his thing. The crystals soon lit up every single one of them. It was like some kind of multicolored puzzle. So completed. It's already good if he continues like this finish within an hour, even 30 minutes. Time was passing faster and faster, but there was still plenty of time, almost 6 hours. He kept hitting the keys, and time kept slipping away just like that, just under 7 hours left. The audience couldn't believe it. He's insane. The guy was breathing hard and solving the puzzle. It wasn't too hard. The trouble was that time was running out. Soon, almost everything was ready. Only one crystal was burning green instead of blue for some reason. He pressed the last crystal, and it began to turn blue. That was it. The test. It took him about 30 minutes as expected. The portal started to open. Someone had sponsored him for 200 coins. The spectator marveled. He's a genius. Is he from Mensa? Kim smiled and said, no, he isn't. User Love again sponsored him for 500 coins. Great job. He thanked everyone and quickly checks the rewards and continues on his way. The guy opened the gift. There was just a small bag of money. Amazing. But still, there were 10,000 coins in there. With that amount of money, he could easily get a bunch of heroic rank skills. The guy looked at the pouch and decided to hurry up. His furry friends weren't feeling well. He picked up the fuzzies and ran to the 5th floor. The critters were still feeling pretty bad. He's doing well enough as it is. No need to worry, he's doing well so far. There's no need to rush. The only thing he needs to do is not give himself up on the 5th floor, then he'll be fine. He stepped through the portal. He found himself in some strange place. The trial of the 5th floor had begun. The spectators there couldn't move. He was given 1 week in local world time. He would become the owner of one of the paintings of the destroyed world. There are 2 ways to pass the 5th floor trial. The first and the worst is to kill another user. He found himself in a different place. A large castle towered above the rest, luxurious towers pointing straight up. The kid got to his feet. He felt strange. However, for now, everything was normal. The kid sat on the bed with his legs down and seemed to be musing about something. His eyes were still cloudy, but he could already see that he was in some other room. The furnishings here were rich. He opened the book he was holding before Empire 944. Now he was 10 years old. He had asked his father for a magical animal as a birthday present, but had gotten a slap instead. The judgmental look from his older brother broke his heart. What went wrong? I think it was some kind of diary. Empire 944, February 22nd. He created a secret space under his room without his father's knowledge, offered a gold coin to Fordrick for his help, but here it was not accepted. In the future, he would give him a magical animal. Wow, the guy even knew who he was copying now. He exhaled heavily and stared at the book. This is the second heir of the Nyoli du Toprox Empire. The emperor had discovered the magical beast that his prince was raising, so the principal had to burn it with his own hands. The guy closed the book with a slam. Also, he was nicknamed the executioner for throwing tantrums in a drunken rage. Yes, he was lucky to be in the body of such a man. He looked through the book and opened the mission panel. One had to reach the chosen end, the copied character prince, quest to become emperor. However, capturing the throne by the force would not be accepted as the correct ending. 6 days and 16 hours left. Guy walked up to the rack of books and stumped. 6 days? Emperor? Isn't that too hard? A chill ran down his spine. Why did he have to play a second executioner prince who was a moonlight walk from the throne? He'd better really become a magical engineer like he planned. The reality on the 5th floor is an alternate reality, so there's barely a minute in present time before you go to the 6th floor. There are 2 ways to complete the challenge. Either reach the chosen end, either kill the other user. Suddenly, a sign appeared in front of his face. You will feel the destruction of this world with your entire body. After that, goosebumps ran down his back. He noticed how the chat room started to fight. He waved his hands and said that if he saw this again, he would ban them. He looked at the assignment plate and still couldn't accept it. This sucks. It's not going to be easy. He was prompted to choose a power that suited him, depending on the choice a figure was given that users had to copy on the 5th floor. If users chose high difficulty, he is prescribed a significant historical figure of the Empire. Magical abilities are prescribed for the main mage of the Empire. Magical engineering for the platinum engineers of the Empire is obvious. Physical strength and endurance for the chief guards of the Empire. There are still high classes, or the path of the assassin, but their abilities are much lower than the ones listed above, so few people choose them. The guy thought about it. A lot of things depend on this choice, and a discussion started in the chat room. As planned, he would choose magical engineering. Guy gleamed with his eyes. He chose, and immediately a sign appeared in front of him. Was he sure he wanted to choose a power related to a magical animal? He didn't say anything, but the choice seems to have been made for him. Yes, he will be assigned a power related to a magical beast. What a bastard. He wanted to be a magical engineer. The guy was furious, but it seemed impossible to change anything. He went down to the bottom, and now he's totally fucked. Now he's sitting in this prince's body. He said he wanted magical engineering, so why the fuck did he get a magical animal? Okay, it's too late for tears. We gotta do something. What should we do? If the end goal is easy, then just achieve it. For example, if he became a magical engineer, then he would finish the trial by creating an invention. If the goal is difficult, it can be achieved by killing another player, which is logical in principle. And for such a sure goal, becoming an emperor seems to be the best choice. The first day, he was getting used to his new body. It is important for users to read their character's diary to get information about them and their situation. That's what he's been doing all day. What a load of crap that was written in there. Suddenly, the door opened, and a man in an elegant suit appeared on the threshold. The boy turned and asked, "Is there anyone outside?" He looked at the roomer and told him to get Fordrick. The man bowed and went to carry out the order. After reading the diary, the boy should realize what this man was planning. He closed the book. Soon, after a few minutes, Fordrick himself appeared on the doorstep. He bowed and headed out. The man asked if it was about the new magical animal. The boy nodded his head. He was just thinking about what to tell him. The servant said he assumed the boy would ask that, so he prepared himself. The man snapped his fingers, and something covered with a sheet was brought to him. This magical beast came from the north. Something hidden under a white blanket was brought into the room. The boy stared at it. A servant tore the sheet away, and there was a cage with popoi in it. Yes, that's exactly what they are. They are known for their vicious nature, but they act suspiciously quiet. The boy could hardly contain a scream. He had completely forgotten about his pooches. However, he tried to keep his composure. They seemed to be some kind of non-energetic. The servant replied that he had asked the hunters, but they didn't understand the reason for their sickly condition. By checking on his own, he could guess that they had ingested too many mana stones. Basically, was looking at his new toy when suddenly someone clicked him. The servant was suddenly horrified. He grabbed hold of the boy and screamed, how was it possible that his body was suddenly emanating mana? What had happened during the month he had been in the north? The boy shrank back and said that his body was fine. There was no need to worry. But the servant wasn't going to calm down. It couldn't be. However, people just explode from having mana inside them. By pure coincidence, there was nothing threatening in his life. The mana had gotten inside his head. So far, even if he starts to get nervous or angry, he can quickly come to his senses. So far, there is nothing to be afraid of, but even if it gets worse, his emotions can get out of control. The servant said in a trembling voice that the prince could no longer absorb Manu. The boy was silent. He walked up to the servant and patted him on the shoulder, saying that he understood and would take note. The man probably didn't expect such a reaction from the ebullient prince and bowed courteously and asked to be dismissed. Before leaving, he informed that the first prince had begun to do strange things lately. Please let the boy be careful. Kim smiled and thanked him for his concern. He will bring those magical animals to the basement himself. Fordrick is the prince's only advisor. He was his mother, Empress Pradessa's personal knight, but ended his activities as a knight when she left this world, and specifically became the young prince's advisor. So it's all about the magic stones. That's what made Fluffy look so lethargic. Ideally, he should have been trembling in fear of the dragonkin and the turtle. He remembered those events on the second floor again. Still, far more worrying was the fact that the principal was up to something. In a week, he has to defeat the first prince and become emperor. Killing the enemy is easier, but if he reaches the end in another way, he will get a better reward. Like the diary says, you have to do it this way. He pulled a new book from the shelf. As soon as he pushed it aside, the closet began to move, revealing a secret passage. There was a hole in the floor with steps that led down to the basement, where the prince had done his mutilations. The boy held a cage of fluffy animals in his hands and headed straight down. Soon he was down in the basement. It was gloomy, and there were cages and chests everywhere. A pop-up appeared in front of him, and the boy stared there. The cages were full of animals who had no idea what was waiting for them. It seemed that instead of wariness and fear, they were happy to see their master. He put the cage with the fluffy animals, who looked at him with a pitiful look. Tears came to his eyes as he left his fluffy animals here, for he didn't know what was waiting for them outside. The animals cried. They recognized their master, but he couldn't take them with him for their own good. Perhaps he should buy a skill book for them. Maybe that would help at least. The good thing about skill books is that he doesn't need to read them. The content of the book goes straight to his head, making the mastering process extremely easy. He confirmed the purchase. A basic level 1 animal magic skill was created. He didn't find anything, but it would be good for furries. He didn't find much, but at least this cheap skill would come in handy. He climbed out of the basement. The boy closed the door behind him. He had somewhere else to go. Guy squinted his eyes. His rival first prince had probably chosen the knight or mage class. Head mages have their own room for research, and knight captains have their own training grounds. If he thought in terms of rewards, he needs to hinder the other streamer as much as possible to be in an advantageous position himself. The man held his sword in his hands and pulled it out worn. He prepared to deliver a crushing blow. Only a few seconds passed. He swung the sword a few times and chopped the training doll to shreds. It took a lot of strength, and the man was breathing heavily. This was insane. This was another streamer. He had only used the skill book, and it felt like he had been training his whole life. His name was Lee Sunjae. He swung his sword over and over again, practicing like a beast. His skill level grew from the movements. There was a crazed expression on his face. He was killing himself with his strength. He chose the high difficulty of the first floor so he could get a lot of donations. And on the second floor with his skills, he easily defeated the monsters. The guy was probably thinking about Jeju and was very jealous of him. But now, he's going to get even with him. Before the guy could finish his celebration, a guest came to him. The chat room started saying he looked like he'd been seen somewhere before. Rich clothes. What was his name? There was a boy standing in front of him. It seems to be the second prince of Kaoli, right? The man looked at him with surprised eyes and was stunned. He immediately got down on one knee and respectfully said that he was extremely honored to see the prince here. But what had he forgotten here? He was sure he had read the diary correctly. So why was he here? The prince stood in front of him and ordered him to stand, for he was pleased to see this man training in the name of the empire. Lee looked at him and wondered, is he a streamer too? No, he probably chose a mage or knight like himself. His character uses a sword, a grandmaster, a black lion, an honest man who hates liars. At first, it was hard to get used to his speech, but quickly adapted by copying the demeanor of other knights. The knight hid his sword and asked the prince what brought him to this place. He smiled and said he seemed to just remember what kind of alcohol he liked. Didn't he tear up at his last birthday party when he didn't find his favorite alcohol at the banquet? The prince smiled, so he thought send him his favorite drink. But he doesn't know much about it, so he completely forgot the name. Will he remind me? Lai was at a loss for words. He was one step away from being exposed. This is unthinkable. He didn't even understand anything and turned to the chat room for help. Where the hell did this happen? What the hell is this? The chat room didn't know anything either. The knight bowed and said that this alcohol was called Pertale. The guy looked at him with a surprised look and said he'd bring it tomorrow. He would find it tomorrow and bring it to him as a gift. A smile appeared on his face. Lee was startled. He was one step away from giving away his presents. He bowed to the prince and thanked him. However, it seems that wasn't all. The prince smiled and said, "Come to think of it, he completely forgot to ask. What is his Korean name?" The boy held out his hand. He seemed to have guessed everything. Lee looked at him and said, "This guy is crazy." He looked at the boy and asked, "Is that even who he is?" The prince looked at him and smiled. "Is he blind?" The second prince. The smile never left his face. The man moved closer to him and asked again, "Is he really the prince?" But he didn't even bring his advisor with him for protection, so why the hell is he provoking him alone? The second streamer seemed to have guessed everything too, so let him ask how he figured it out. He was trying to act natural, after all. The prince laughed. The thing is, this prince is a complete introvert and wrote down every little thing in his diary. Lee tried to talk to the chat, but he failed. He made such a grimace that he was ready to die. Lee looked at the prince and said he was just a piece of shit without any talent. Who can die with one swing of a sword? Kim wasn't going to back down. He had sensed the vulgarity from the start. He wanted to pretend he didn't notice, but that disgusting smell stuck in his nose. Lai was furious. He had already grabbed his sword to finish this lousy guy off. Suddenly, the courtier Fordrick burst in and ran straight towards them. "What do you mean?" He immediately grabbed hold of the prince and started to examine him. "Is he injured?" The knight veered away from them. The servant didn't calm down. What is he doing? He had seen the man raise his sword with his own eyes. However, the prince decided to still cover for his opponent and said that he just wanted to see the wielding of the weapon, so he asked him to demonstrate his skills, right? The soldier replied with a nod. However, the servant didn't calm down. He said that he felt bloodlust from him. He made a fearful face. The prince was convinced that he had just told him to show his skill all he was capable of. He seemed to calm down and patted the soldier on the shoulder, telling him to be careful from now on if he didn't want to be accused of an assassination attempt. Then he leaned over to him and whispered in his ear that he would have his limbs torn off, tied to a horse, and driven through the city. Scared to death, he bowed, and in a trembling voice said he had made a mistake. The servant said that enough was enough. Since the prince wished to spare him, he would not broach the subject. The soldier, frightened out of his wits, ran straight out of the hall. He needed to calm down. With his servant, the prince went to the exit. He had never let this happen before. Today something was wrong. Wasn't it because he used to keep it everywhere? The servant said that he was sorry. The heart of the empire, Great Master Black Lion, had behaved so frivolously. The prince replied that it seems the servant misses the old days. The man looked at him with a surprised look. Something had changed in his gaze, something imperceptible that might have slipped away. What a gloating remark. After all, the servant put a hand to his chest. He didn't remember anything from before the oath of allegiance to the empire. The boy nodded his head. "I see. Let it be." Then, they separated. The prince said that he was wandering around because it was kind of boring in the room. Let him not worry, and mind his own business. The servant nodded his head. Then they went their separate ways, and Fordrick went to do his duties. Kim was furious. He'd lost more time than he'd bargained for. He'd have to visit the magical engineer's workshop tomorrow. He had goosebumps on his back. Everything was happening too fast. Time was too short. However, he was still going to reach in the chosen ending. No, there had to be another way. There had to be. The boy thought. However, there was no time. The knight, or rather the streamer who was in his body, came to the library and requested the documents on this servant. They were handed to him at once. It was a small stack of papers. Now he has all the proof. How lucky he was. Then, he immediately turned to his chat room. He decidedly didn't know what to do. The situation was heating up. If this guy was a prince, he would immediately order him to be killed. He was ready to cry on the spot. Suddenly, someone from his audience said that, "Stop shaking him. He knows how to kill him, you." The man looked hopefully in front of him. Let him find information about this prince, and at the same time about his servant, the man began to leaf through the papers. There was all the information he needed. The servant was a missionary from the Empire. Mission time 29 days. Mission details: check and research the ecosystem of magical beasts. Note 3. Popoi were captured. Environmental circumstances. There didn't seem to be quite enough information there. The chat started prompting him. The guy looked at it all and didn't understand anything. Finally, the audience realized, this is the same kid who walked the first floor with this beast. Lee didn't understand anything and asked, does his identity even matter? The chat replied that of course it was important. Let him listen to the end. First, you have to go to the edge of the gate. There should be a chapel. Let him go straight there. The man did the right thing. And indeed, there was a small old chapel in that very spot. A smile appeared on his face. This method should only work if the identity of the enemy is known, and he knows it. The man clenched his fist. That's it. He's finished. Now he's going to get even. An hour ago, he was fumbling around the room for commas and trying to find any information he could. The man left the room and headed down the hallway. Footsteps somehow reached his hearing. It was the prince, or rather his main rival. He was walking straight towards him. They met, and the tension between them began to rise. Kim looked at him again. He had heard that he had had a background check done on him. Lee's response was to let him quit the game. He's popular enough, right? To who? He knows his name, so it's okay. As soon as the man said the main character's name, he immediately twitched. He noticed it right away, so he was right. A chill ran down his spine. As soon as the man realized it, he ran towards the exit. Kim didn't even have time to say anything. He just stretched out his hand. It's the end of the end of the end of the end. He's not going to die in here. The man had a fierce smile on his face. Soon, he was already on the secret place of the 5th floor, which the spectators had told him about, and was climbing somewhere in some bushes. The man pushed back the bushes and saw before him the very chapel he needed to find. If he revealed the name of his rival in the chapel, he would immediately pass the level and get to the next one. However, this easy victory would cost him the opportunity to raise his skill level. In addition, if he makes a mistake, he will receive a serious penalty, so this method is not particularly recommended. But who cares about raising skill levels when your life is at stake? He entered the chapel, and there was already some kind of altar there. A man walked up to the altar and put his hands in the water. There was some kind of key. He took out the key and started looking at it frantically. This was his salvation. Suddenly, a tablet popped up in front of his face. As soon as the man read something, written there, his eyes rounded. His wisdom will be tested. Let him utter the name of the participant that passes the same test. He said the name he recognized. His voice trembled. It was incredibly scary to depend on it. He began to check his answer. A sign popped up in front of him, confirming his answer. He immediately pressed yes. Suddenly, everything began to shake. Something had gone wrong. What the hell? The answer was wrong. He was cursed by the evil spirit that laughs at wisdom. The statue's eyes glowed red. The man's entire body was also covered in a red veil. Current user character, Rojens Carlson. The chosen end of acquiring the 5 sword skills of a first-level Empire Knight. Curse. Loss of all learned skills. The man definitely didn't expect this. He had done everything right after all. He raised his hands up and cried out in despair. Now he's going to lose everything. What the fuck is this? He screamed, and his scream echoed far beyond the chapel. As he ran away from the boy, recognizing his name, the chat started to riot, needing to understand it urgently. However, the boy didn't seem worried. Thank God this guy is such a simpleton. He spat on the ground. Everything here is normal. He fixed his hair, and his face reflected guile. Once again, he was up to something. The feeling was that he knew everything perfectly well. The boy walked briskly towards his door. He opened the door wide and entered his room, which was empty, by the way. The door opened with a slam. There was a backpack in the corner, the same one he'd put his stuff in. The guy looked at it with a wary look. He started rummaging through it, apparently something else. The rest of the onlookers just watched him in amazement. He pulled out a small ticket. It was the same ticket that could be used to change your name in the game. The guy tore the ticket with a crunch and got ready. Now he would change his name. A table with a keyboard popped up in front of him, asking him to enter his new game name. He entered the exact same name as last time, only he added the number 2. Everyone started laughing. Since he has the role of Grand Master, he must learn the 5 sword skills, the first knight of the Empire, if he remembered correctly. A triumphant smile appeared on his face. For failing the wisdom test, all his points would be cancelled. This would be his triumph. After losing a skill, the player is forced to re-buy skill books. Unless there are rich sponsors among his audience, he will not reach his ending. But there are unlikely to be any such fools among those people. The chat room started discussing his actions. It's probably important. The guy couldn't take the ridicule, so he started yelling. What the hell is wrong with the power of a name? He was just in a hurry and didn't have time to come up with something interesting. It's just a nickname, and not much different from his previous one. Any questions? Perhaps it was too hasty a decision, really. Well, to be fair, time was really running out. Suddenly, a voice was heard from somewhere. The person was apparently trying to break free. The guy looked in that direction. He came out of his room and was surprised to find that there were guards standing near his door, apparently holding someone. The knight was standing there. He was furious. The guard said he had to talk to the boy. His eyes glittered with madness. He gritted his teeth and asked if he had a moment. It was obvious by the look of him that he was clearly worried about something. The boy hummed and said he could go through. The guards looked at him in surprise, but obeyed. The door slammed. The chat room began to discuss what had happened. Doesn't this prince have his own army? It seems his servant is an army in one person. When the two of them were alone, Lee was furious. He was ready to tear the boy in half for setting him up like that. His face contorted with anger. Who the hell was he? His eyes were burning. The boy looked at him with his green eyes and smiled. He thought he had said this before. Didn't he remember here? The man was furious and grabbed a nearby chair. He swung it around and threw it right at the boy. To get even with him, he shouted angrily, "Stop playing around!" Kim dodged the chair and didn't react. The chat room was celebrating. They were laughing at the loser. However, the man seemed to be serious. He grabbed his weapon and roared that this was how it was going to end. Now, they would see which one of them would die first. He approached the boy and prepared to attack him. The boy watched him. This fool moved somehow completely different, maybe because all his skills were gone. I don't know. He deftly parried his blow, dodged and grabbed his arm, squeezing it to the point where it released his sword. There was nothing the man could do. He was clearly weaker. He had confused all his skills, and now there was nothing he could do. Kim squeezed his wrist, even though it wasn't very hard, but even that was enough for him to let the weapon out of his hand. He looked at his failed assassin and whispered that he would still be useful, so the guy would let him survive. Then, he got close to him and whispered in his ear that he shouldn't take his mercy for fear. The poor man fell silent. He was ready to cry now. Then the boy let him go and pushed him lightly in the back. It wasn't hard. The loser fell down and gritted his teeth with rage. There was nothing he could do. He had lost, and he realized it. The guy looked down at him and said that if he understood everything here, then let him get out. The poor guy jumped to his feet and headed for the door, almost falling on the way. The prince smiled. Well, this loser won't bother him anymore, so there's nothing to worry about. But he shouldn't have pushed him so hard. The chat room wondered what his plan was now. The boy went to the table and said he'd think about it. He could kill this man anytime he wanted, but it was a little early. The day was coming to an end, and he was tired, so he went straight to bed. If the current emperor doesn't die, there won't be another emperor. The boy plunged into his own thoughts. But even with the sudden death of the ruling emperor, the next in line would be the first prince. The best option would be to learn magic engineering before the final day. Then he will get rid of his rival. But then he'd have to get rid of the rewards for the ending, and that's bad enough. On his first try, the boy chose the way of the warrior. He practiced hard, but he wasn't making much progress. Are they sure it's an axe? It's too heavy. The chat told him to stop whining and keep practicing. The guy smiled and said he was just curious. Suddenly, he saw some procession walking past him. The guy looked over there with interest. What's going on? The onlookers said that he is again looking for a reason just not to train. The guy got embarrassed and said, that's not true. If there's an event there, then you have to go there? The boy looked up with a studying look. The 6th day of the trial had passed. The boy standing in handcuffs. Now he would be on trial. Trial? The guy looked up there with a surprised look. Who was being tried? He looked at the chat room and asked to be shared. He didn't know anything. But then, he was allowed to go and see. The guy was overjoyed and started jumping on the spot. He went inside, and there were already several people standing there, talking among themselves. Apparently something terrible had happened there. Suddenly, the doors opened behind him, and another man walked in, looking at him in surprise. At that moment, he found himself in the body of the swordmaster. He greeted the man and asked, "What happened?" The count looked at him in surprise and said that he didn't seem to know anything yet. The imperial court would be coming soon. But what did that mean? The boy still didn't understand anything, and the man began to swivel his head around looking for someone to listen to them. He leaned over to the boy and whispered in his ear that the second prince had been taken into custody and charged with the murder of the emperor. The boy could not believe his eyes. The count smiled, and without a shadow of doubt, said that it might be for the best. There was nothing to think about. The second prince was of no use. The boy looked forward and saw that there were already a lot of people gathered here, so this crowd had gathered for the trial of the prince? The count nodded. He looked over there and shivered. It looked like something interesting was about to happen. Suddenly, someone poked him in the shoulder. He turned around and saw a familiar face. It was the courtier of the little prince. He looked at the player and apologized. The look of him was not very good, to say the least. The man immediately tried to hide in the crowd. The emperor didn't trust anyone, so he put guards everywhere, and besides, his death by a stranger is already crossing all limits. The guards stubbornly watched everything that was going on. In addition, all the knights guarding him were converted beastmen. The prince himself was very weak and could hardly handle him. Well, we'll have to see what the court has to say. Soon, the hall here was completely memorized. The most noble people were here. The ceremony should start soon. People were chatting that it was obvious that there was a prince involved here no other way. However, the guy sat and silently watched. Since the matter is quite serious, that's putting it mildly, the hall here is filled to the brim. He circled the stands with his eyes. All the top mages and warriors were here, the cream of the crop, great masters of all stripes. Then the man interrupted the hum that reigned in the hall and the bell that signaled that the ceremony had begun. The judge, who was seated in his seat and dressed in a cassock, put down the bell and began to speak. He realized that all the nobles were gathered here. He was a man with neat, stern glasses. He said that despite all this, the trial would be strict and fair. If anyone initiates a disturbance, it will be punished severely, regardless of status. The lower house representative of the commoners is Kane. A man stood up and introduced himself. Middle chamber representative Marquise Krauts. A man with an elegant mustache stood up and bowed. The guy lost his hands. He was bored, so he took off his wig today and saw a bald spot. Finally, the high chamber. Since the leader has passed away, Grand Duke Magnus will take his place at the hearing. The man in the black jacket rose and bowed. The three stood and listened, the named jurors. Please let the teachings of the goddess of justice meet. Do you swear to judge with an open mind and without giving in to emotion? All nodded in the affirmative, affirming their impartiality and fairness. The judge leaned over and proceeded to say, before they begin, let it be noted that this trial was organized in haste because the defendant was caught red-handed. Therefore, the testimony has not been collected thoroughly enough, and the defendant has not confessed to what he did. With that, he asks for understanding. This trial is necessary for the official record. In principle, everything is clear. The tribunes began to murmur and discuss what was happening. Everyone was interested. That means they don't have to prove the crime. Is that clear? The judge ordered the defendant to rise and take his seat in the courtroom. The boy with handcuffs on his hands rose from his seat. His face contorted with fear or no expression at all, the boy began to walk slowly toward the podium. He approached his podium on shaky legs. You could see how worried the guy was. The referee asked him to introduce himself. The boy gave his name. Does he understand that due to the confirmed fact of the crime, the question of the identity of the suspect is not before the court, and the lawyer will not be present at the trial? The boy nodded his head in agreement. He didn't seem to care at all right now. He was incredibly scared. The crime happened as follows. At 2 a.m. today, the prince went to the sleeping emperor's room and asked for an audience with him. He spoke to him in the reception room for about half an hour. The court turned and asked the witness, does he confirm what he said? One of the guards turned there and nodded his head. Yes, when the reception sounds stopped happening, the knight's guards opened the door with suspicion. The man had scales on his face. He was probably a lizard. They immediately went inside and looked around. The emperor was lying on the floor in his own blood with only the prince in front of him. He was scared. He probably didn't realize what he'd done. The guy was crying. He didn't know what had happened. People started whispering, some doubting the truth of the accusation, some cursing. The poor boy stood behind the podium, tears streaming down his eyes. He didn't know what to do. The boy rubbed his hands and tried to come to his senses. His hands were handcuffed, with powerful handcuffs that did not allow him to move his hands. The witness kept talking. After investigating the cause of death, it turned out that the tea that the emperor was happily drinking contained a powder, a poisonous powder. The same powder was found on the clothes of the second prince. The judge listened to the testimony and asked, if anyone has a supplement to what was said, would you like to say anything? The boy shook his head and said he had nothing to say. He was literally crying. The judge sat back in his seat. Then, that was it. The trial was over. The jury went into a frenzy. They were hoping for a spectacle, or at least a fair trial, but it was over. Kim was horrified. What kind of trial is this? What on earth was going on? The guy clenched his hands into a fist and was ready to snap out of his seat. What the fuck is going on here? The guy felt sorry for the boy. The representative of the high chamber told everyone to stop the balaganza immediately. The gods must be looking down on them right now and laughing. He had a look of utter disgust on his face. He ordered the others to tie the youngest prince to a horse cart and drag him around the city. Let all the citizens know what happens to those who take the life of a ruler. The boy became terrified and began to shake with fear. The man looked at the others and asked in a loud voice, does everyone agree? The representative of the peasants agreed. He clenched his fist. Apparently he wanted the prince to be punished the most. The representative of the middle chamber smiled and nodded his head in agreement. There was only one person who disagreed, the little prince's courtier. Well, he shouted, this is nonsense. He was immediately looked at with surprise. People asked, "Did the court lie somewhere?" The man looked at the others. However, the man disagreed. There was anger on his face. No matter how serious the circumstances of the department were, the investigation was not done properly, and had been done in a rush, as if in an attempt to cover something up, as if someone had insisted on it. The man begged for them to finally realize this was not at all in line with the princeps daily routine. The representative of the upper house looked at him with obvious disgust, and in his snobbish manner began to speak. Does he want everyone to reconsider the crime because of his personal feelings? The man wrinkled his face and waved his hand, ordering him to take this prince away at last. 2 guards came up to him at once and took him under the arms. The boy didn't even resist. His servant tried to do something, but nothing worked. Kim sat there, unable to do anything. The guy in the chat room tried to wake him up. Did he fall asleep? I think he's in shock. The boy sat there and didn't understand anything. What kind of world is this? What is going on here? The boy clenched his teeth and tried to restrain himself. He did not restrain himself and shouted, "Yes, he will destroy the whole damn tower. And as for the city, he'll tell the administration everything." Suddenly, there was a message. Could he take responsibility for those words? He finally woke up. It was just a dream, a very fucked up dream, but a very intense one. The trial of that prince. From his dream, it was just a horrible sight. He was still getting goosebumps. Because of all those videos, he got too excited about the outcome of the trial, and it was affecting his sleep a lot. They started asking him, so what's he gonna do? Just let him kill him, but the guy had already made up his mind. He got up from the bed and in full confidence went forward, the boy home, that after all, there is one loophole that can be exploited. The boy was sitting on a chair reading a book about beastmen. He wanted to study their habits. He opened the book to one of the pages, otherwise read. The reason why Kaoli was so fixated on animal magic was because of the emperor. There was nothing about the prince in this video, so we'll have to find out for ourselves. The boy continued to read, thinking about every word, but it was difficult. He was starting to boil slowly. It was hard, and there was minimal information. Fuck. What's the matter? Why do you have so little information here? Maybe you should ask your fate. As soon as he said that, the doors opened, and a man appeared on the doorstep. As soon as the boy saw this, his jaw dropped. How did this happen? How long had he been standing there anyway? The boy coughed and took on a pious appearance. He wanted to ask him something. The man walked over and bowed his head. The boy started to talk about when his father slapped him, when he asked him about the magical beast when he was a child. Did the man remember crying, or the boy, or not? The man came with his hand to his chest and said he remembered everything, every detail about it, surprised he remembered it too. The boy went on to say when he asked, why did the father get angry, he said he would find out, but he still hasn't told the reason. Isn't it time to find out? The man tensed. Well, so be it. He wouldn't dissect it. He began his story. The boy headed forward with a quick stride. The boy was fully confident in his abilities. He was walking down the night corridor, heading for the Emperor's chamber. There was outrage in the chat room. The Emperor is a psychopath. Don't even let him think about going out with him. The guys smiled. They're reacting so negatively. Well, it turns out that's the way it should be. It's all going according to plan. The Emperor started to lose his mind after his wife died. He believed that everyone who was responsible for ending her eventually stopped trusting anyone. He loved his wife so much that such hate for his left-behind child seems completely illogical. As the man began his story, he struggled to immerse himself in those memories, which incidentally, he remembered constantly. He said that that time, the magical animal he wanted to get as a birthday present would have been too dangerous. Indeed, the boy stood beside a large, sturdy cage containing a furry beast whose eyes glowed with rage. He was walking forward. They tried to stop him, but it was all to no avail. He walked forward with a firm gait. He was approaching the door of the Emperor's chambers, where 2 guards were already standing guarding the entrance. He looked at the panel and said that before he entered, he should turn off the chat room, as he would need to maximize his concentration. Okay? The chat room was starting to riot. He scowled and told them not to worry. They would see it all for themselves when the time came. There was still resentment. You're so... He turned off the chat. I need to concentrate. He kept saying his name over and over again. Instead of a shy and timid boy, the Emperor will see a different man, one that even the Emperor himself will be surprised to see. He approached the guards and was the first to start a conversation. Are they already working for nothing? Fearful twitched. The boy stood in front of them and said that he was requesting an audience with His Majesty. The guards stood still. They closed the entrance in front of him with their spears and said it was impossible now. The boy was surprised, really, even for a prince of the empire. The men replied that there was no, and there could be no exception. Their look made it clear that they would not give up their place. The guy sucked his nose heavily into the air. Okay, then we'll have to proceed with the heavy artillery. People don't show emotion anyway. He shouted that the second principal was requesting an audience with the emperor as he wanted to tell him something. The guy spoke as loudly as possible. However, the beastmen didn't seem to pay any attention to him. They still stood blocking the entrance with their spears. The boy stood in front of them and waited. Soon, the doors creaked open and a foot appeared. It was bright and spacious. Another beastman came out of there and politely told the boy to wait in the reception area. The boy nodded. Soon, he was allowed into the hall. His shadow slipped just inside and found himself in the audience chamber. The boy sat in front of the emperor with guards sitting behind him, watching intently. He closed his eyes and tried to bring himself to his senses, repeating constantly that he is the prince. Gotta stay focused. Soon, the doors to the reception area opened, and the emperor appeared on the threshold. He was a roughly middle-aged man, somewhere around 40, with green eyes and a stern expression. He looked at his son and said in a stern voice, wondering what he was looking for him. The boy got up from his seat, bowed, and asked, what was strange about son wanting to see his father? The man slammed his fist on the table and barked, since when did he start treating him like his father? The boy smiled and said in an innocent voice that it was really always like that. He was trying to play his part. The emperor didn't seem to trust these words. He leaned in and said that he always emphasized that there should be a strong foundation behind any words. The boy, in a mysterious voice, began to speak. He said that he knew that his majesties had secretly put beastmen on him. Wasn't it because he was worried about him? The emperor looked at him and smiled widely. He seemed to like the boldness of it, the boldness and the statement. The boy said what mattered was how he understood it. If it was an act of parental love, then as a son, he would follow it. Inwardly, he shivered. Well, about the beastmen following him, he learned from the chatter outside the audience in the chat room. The emperor smiled and sighed. He seemed to be in a better mood. The man collapsed on the couch and said, is that all he had to say or not? The boy glanced at the guards and asked if the emperor should tell them to leave. After all, this was a confidential conversation. The man smiled and asked, what was the reason his guards had to leave this place? The boy smiled and said that he was just embarrassed. One must use caution after all. There was some energy between them, something strange. The tension was gradually increasing. The man waved his hand, ordering the guards to leave. The two bowed and immediately followed to the exit. Soon, they left the hall. The emperor, along with his son, were left alone. The man said, so the boy knew everything. But now, he would be able to hear the real reason why he had asked them to escort them out, and the begging sign. The boy smirked and looked at his father. If this ring really magically controlled the monsters, then they could be left untouched. However, the ring on the emperor's finger was not real, and there was indeed a small ring on his fingers with some kind of gem inside. There was silence between them. The emperor didn't know what to say. He just examined his ring more closely. The man smiled, I see. So what proof does he have about it? He looked at his son back at the dock. Whatever he says next will decide his fate. The boy looked at him with a confident look and said that, if the truth be told, he had another ring. His first son, and also the first prince, was the first to be recognized by the emperor for his bravery and leadership in winning the Battle of the Eastern Plains. During the victory celebration, an unfortunate incident occurred. A drunken first principal spilled alcohol on him. The father listened to this, but suddenly ordered the boy to stop. Enough is enough. He wants to convince him only written in the document? The boy looked at him and said that this is what was written in the documents. Now he will add from himself. The first principle of alcohol with his handkerchief and discreetly removed his ring. He replaced it with a fake and hid the real ring in the tent. Now the king had a fake on his finger. The emperor is furious. It's just a stupid hunch. Where's one reason, one proof of what he said? The boy tried to calm down. The emperor has no reason to be angry, so everything is under control for now. And they are not needed, said the boy. After all, he knows it all himself, doesn't he? He just wanted to say everything here and now. The emperor was suddenly surprised and laughed. He laughed a hearty laugh and said that he hadn't had so much fun in a long time. The lad looked at him and asked if he could think he would live longer. The father offered a laugh and said he didn't know he had an ace up his sleeve all along. He'd only pretended he didn't know for a while, but now he's here. That meant he wanted something from him, right? The boy nodded his head. Yes, that's right. The emperor continued to look at him. The boy said in a confident voice that he wanted to become emperor. His voice sounded without a shadow of doubt. The emperor looked at him and smiled. Is that so? But in an empire, the seat belongs to only one emperor. The boy nodded his head and said that he understood all of this perfectly, a smile beginning to spread across his face. And so, please let him die. A real grin shone on his face. The guy looked at him with his big green eyes. The man sitting on the couch looked at the screen and laughed heartily. It seemed to cheer him up. He kept looking at the boy who was smiling at his emperor and preparing to kill him. The man continued to laugh. What a bastard. This amused him a lot. He was a great guy. He had no equal here. He watched his every move and was getting more and more excited. It's going to be an interesting spectacle. Could it be that he had been waiting for someone like this for so long, and finally he showed up? The man decided to sponsor him with 1,000 coins. The man sent him a donut and yelled at him to nail absolutely everyone there. He was furious and overjoyed at the same time. The guy received the donut and felt like the richest person in the world. Someone had sponsored him so much. The chat started to admire him. The guy thanked everyone. He turned on the chat and laughed. It must be unpleasant to look at the chat turned off, right? The audience asked, what is he going to do anyway? What if things didn't go according to plan? The guy wasn't going to answer. He just said he was going to go and have breakfast and then learn new skills. He went to the door to the workshop. Is this it? He could finally get to study magic engineering. Everything inside him was literally trembling with impatience. He was about to go inside. However, someone called out to him. What was he doing here? The boy turned his head there. It was the first prince, and also the main heir to the throne. He was looking down at the kid with obvious disdain. The boy looked at his brother and asked the same question, a grimace on his face. Apparently, he was not very happy to see him. They looked at each other like that for a few more minutes. The elder prince laughed. He had slipped into manners since the last time they had met. His father had kept him out of his hair to some extent at least once, and he was glad. The boy looked at his older brother and said nothing. He must have been curious about what they were talking about with the emperor. Is that why he came here, unable to wait any longer? The boy thought for a moment and said that he did see the emperor at dawn today. It was true. It seems like he found out about it because he received information from someone, right? The eldest prince turned cold. He didn't know what to say, and from fear he even started stuttering. This little brat used to hide behind his servant's back, trembling in fear, and now he dares to speak to me as an equal. What a bastard! The boy had already raised his hand to slap him, but it wasn't meant to be. They were stopped by a rough male voice. The man appeared literally out of nowhere. It was the master of the pre-imperial court of Bran. The man was smoking a pipe, releasing puffs of thick smoke. What was all the fuss being made under his workshop? The elder prince rudely replied that it wasn't his rejuvenation. The man became indignant. What do you mean? They were the ones who stood outside his workshop and started making a row. The eldest prince started to get indignant. The eldest prince shivered and tried to control his anger. He's not even an emperor yet, the man said it with a kind of sneer. He's already asking for respect from him? He would have wanted and could have earned respect if he hadn't made a scene here at the workshop. The elder prince stood there trembling with anger. He clenched his teeth and you could literally hear them grinding. He shouted that he would never tolerate such humiliation. He would not forget this. How dare that bastard consider him such a question? The old man spread his hands and said, let him do whatever he wanted, even if it was to the moon. Let him howl. He frankly didn't care anymore. The man smiled and said he'd write something on his grave as his last will and testament. Prince Elephant is a piece of shit, trusting the first man he meets and a spitfire. This is where the brand rests. I just don't know how it sounds like it's from some mythology. They stood like that across from each other for a few more minutes. The younger prince looked at the master, who was pulling up his pipe. The older prince looked at all this with clenched fists. Only he would be the emperor. He would finish this freak first. Let's see him talk with his head cut off. There was only one plan in his mind to avenge his humiliation. In the end, the prince's delicate nature couldn't take it anymore, and he turned around and ran out of here. He couldn't be here anymore. The boy thanked the master for his help. He puffed on his pipe and replied as if he had helped. He was just pissed off that he'd been making noise since morning and distracting him from his work. The boy went up to the old man and said he had something he wanted to ask him, or rather ask him. If it's an order to kill the first prince he refuses, the old man shook his head. The boy immediately said that was not true at all. The master said with some regret that if it was true, he might have changed his mind. If he wanted to look around, let him come in. The boy apologized and entered the workshop. He hoped he hadn't made a bad first impression. The boy crossed the threshold into the workshop and found himself here in the realm of engineers. He smelled the typical oil smell of the workshop, and he even felt a little lightheaded. How cool is this place, however? He looked around and saw a bunch of all sorts of gear here and tools for making weapons. Everyone started to resent him in the chat room. He was doing what he was told not to do. The boy looked away irritably. There popped up a notification that he had passed in the territory of a character related to magical engineering. The related skills would be available for purchase. The boy opened his information window and took a closer look. Was it related to the fact that his character had a different specialization? All the skills not related to his main profession were so expensive. He continued to look at the text. They only made him dizzy. Bad business. He opened a store and started acquiring skills. Everyone started to resent him. What a bitch. Give me my money back. The guy didn't pay any attention to them. This annoying user got to him, so he decided to kick him out of the chat room. Great, now he can use them as an example. Everyone else loved it. A pop-up appeared in front of him. Does he wish to use the skill book? The guy nodded affirmatively. Skill points were created. He started pumping magic engineering skills. He already had the first level. The convenience of technique and correction with daily life skill study skill was studied higher on. Suddenly, his body twisted. He was about to vomit from learning several skills at once, and he didn't feel like he understood them, more like he memorized them. But still, it was okay. Even with incomplete vision, he could mimic the skills even if he didn't fully understand them. The boy sighed. He grabbed his head, which was still spinning. Now would have to raise his skill level. Where was he even in a hurry? He turned to the master and said he would stay in his workshop for a while. The master didn't seem to be here anymore. Well, here we go. The guy started exploring, closing the door tightly. He knocked on the master's door after a while. He needed to ask something. The old man opened the door and, continuing to smoke his pipe, asked, did he need something from him? He squinted his eyes. The guy nodded his head and said he had a favor to ask. The old man opened the door and invited him inside. The door creaked open. The boy stepped inside and apologized for the intrusion. He was terribly embarrassed to disturb the old man. They walked down the steps to the bottom of the stairs. At this time, the older prince was walking down the hallway. He literally ran. He had heard that the nasty asshole had met with his father this morning, so he thought he would be hiding something. It might take a bit of courage, but overall, basically, nothing would change. The man had a fierce smile on his face. Poor guy, he'd better keep lying in his crib. The guy was furious. Now, he would watch his coronation from the grave. The eldest prince had that very ring on his finger, and it began to glow red. At this time, the boy walked to the workshop, where the master was already standing, and asked what brought him to such a place. The boy shamelessly said that he wanted to use the workshop. The old man folded his arms across his chest and said that if he just wanted to play, that was out of the question. Magical engineering is not a space for toys. The guy replied that he had a basic understanding of the subject, so no need to worry about that. A bit awkward to say at the basic knowledge of thermodynamics and mechanics of materials he has too. The old man took a drag from his pipe and hummed. This is very interesting. He looked intently at the boy. Let him wait a second. The old man dipped a fountain pen into the inkwell and got ready to write something. He pulled out a piece of paper and began to draw some sort of alchemical circle there. He held out the drawn one to the boy and asked if he could interpret it. The boy accepted the piece of paper and gritted his teeth in surprise. Was this some kind of exam? He certainly didn't expect this, but he said he'd give it a try. The old man invited him to sit down and pushed back the table. He was curious himself. He leaned over and said that this magic circle is often used to create a material called leiton, so let the boy solve it. The boy thought about it. This material is used often as a substitute for steel, the three materials that are used in the circle. He began to think. He began to write diligently. The old man looked at him occasionally, and each time he got more and more interested. Soon, the boy finished. On the sheet was the solution to the problem. The old man looked at it, squinted his eyes, and said that offensively, it was only half true. The boy nodded. So he's not allowed to use the workshop? The old man shook his head. It's not true, even though it's only half true, but the interpretation is quite bearable, so let him not worry. Let him use it as much as he wants. The boy glowed with happiness. He had succeeded, after all. The boy was over the moon. The old man took another drag and told the boy to think carefully this time. Such a young boy shouldn't dive into such a craft, especially a prince. He seemed to let that pass his ears, and with a smile replied that hopefully his guidance. Does he listen to him at all? The old man nodded and turned around and walked towards the exit. He said that he would make sure that the elder prince would not even put his foot in it. Now nothing would distract him from studying magical engineering. The boy smiled and nodded his head, saying that let him enter the situation if it got too boring. And then his long journey of learning magic engineering began. He practiced harder and harder every day, and the materials were complicated to say the least, but the guy wasn't going to back down, even when sometimes he didn't understand a damn thing. He picked at the magical devices and studied it with renewed vigor, with 1 day and 16 hours left. Someone's very fast and loud footsteps echoed down the corridor. Apparently, someone was in a hurry. Soon, the door swung open and a servant appeared on the threshold. Looking very worried, he turned to the prince. The boy turned to him and raised an eyebrow in surprise. The emperor has been killed. The 5th day had come. He had completely forgotten about this during his training. What a bummer. He went to the servant and asked him who he thought had done it. The man said that they would have to find out, but the investigation had not yet begun. Suddenly, however, their conversation was interrupted by guards who literally appeared out of thin air. The man charged him with the second prince. They will answer before the law, and God! The servant was furious. What did all this even mean? He put his hand over the boy's arm to keep him from being taken away. The man raised his hand and said that he was only carrying out the arrest of the emperor, so it was no big deal. Due to the exceptional nature of the situation, they are urging the criminal to confess his sins in the courtroom. The guy didn't even resist. They handcuffed him and led him to the exit. The hearing hasn't even started, and they're already labeling him a felon. I'm sure this bailiff is the first prince's man. They chained him up and started to take him out of the workshop. No one even bothered to look. The servant wanted to stop them, but wait, they can't hold him without proof. Soon, the criminal was brought into the hall here, where all the jurors and everyone else had already gathered. Seeming to have déjà vu, the judge rang the bell and called for silence. He realized that there were members of the high nobility present here now and called everyone to silence. However, despite all this, the court of this city judges everyone justly. The guy sat there and remained silent. The secretary's words and their order completely matched his words on the video. It was as if the whole thing was a foregone conclusion. The judge asked everyone to introduce themselves. The defendant stood up and gave his name. He gave everyone a wary look. So that's how that boy felt. Everyone looked at him with rage. And only the only person in the hall, his servant, was looking at him with unspeakable pity. He still couldn't accept it. Of course, most of the nobles are on the prince's side. It's understandable. The second principal was brought here by force, where there are no allies, and he is knowingly considered an outlaw. However, no one understood how even in this position he continues to stand still and say nothing. Does he really have a way out of this situation? The servant clenched his fists and looked at his ward. He sincerely wanted everything to go well. The judge began his tirade about this court being fair and that the lawyer would not be present. The guy agreed to everything. He started reading out the charges and the offense. It was exactly as it was on the video. The same witness was there, the guard who had scales on his eyes, the same man. There it was. The guy looked at him with a wary look. He continued to listen to the accusation. This was an ostentatious and fully planned trial. No one here was going to judge anyone fairly. He just stood there and listened to these baseless accusations, for accusing and eliminating a rival is just the thing. The guy looked at them and didn't say anything. He didn't even raise an eyebrow at that moment. They read out the cause of death, poison in the drink, so no surprise there. Then the judge asked if anyone had any objections. The guy asked if he had an objection, would they listen? The judge nodded his head and told him to go ahead. The boy got to his feet and said that he did not kill his father, the emperor. His voice sounded absolutely firm. Suddenly, there was a resounding bang on the door and shouting, "Disgusting! Just disgusting!" The representative of the upper house of society said that he was only saying what the emperor said. If he had proof, let him produce it. If not, the conversation is over. The boy quietly said he has no proof, but he has valuable witnesses, and he'd give his head if they disproved any of it. The man continued to rage. If this is his last word before he dies, they'll listen to him. Call this one a witness. Heavy footsteps were heard. Someone was coming quickly into the hall here. The man was walking very fast. He must have been afraid of something. As soon as he entered the hall, everyone shrieked in surprise. People began to cover their faces with their hands. How is this possible? Whispers began to spread through the stands. People were shocked and terrified. They had said that the emperor had abandoned them. Then this trial is null and void. Around the emperor's neck was a pendant in which a gem glittered. It was the emperor himself. Yes, the emperor himself. Everyone immediately started whispering. They all thought that the emperor was dead, that he had left them, and now he was sitting here in front of them. What's going on here? The emperor walked quickly into the hall and looked around at everyone. He smiled and said that he was glad to see everyone in good health, as apparently they had gotten along very well with his eldest son over the past year. The representative of the upper house was horrified. This is the emperor alive and well. But what had happened? Why is this man alive? He was shaking with fear. The emperor looked and turned to Grand Duke Magnus. The man spoke firmly and clearly. He seemed to be looking better the last time they met. The man was ready to fall under the ground with fear. He stuttered and couldn't say anything. However, since when did the emperor have to look down on him? The emperor spoke so clearly and firmly that Magnus immediately rose and stood at attention. The man scrambled from his seat and ran downstairs, nearly breaking all his legs. As soon as he came down, he immediately fell to the ground on his knees and began to apologize. He almost cried. All the others followed suit. They had incredible fear in their souls. They had seen the emperor alive and well. This simply could not be. The boy looked at his father. He had a feeling that he was having fun. Did he not feel like he was having fun anymore? Everyone continued to stand in a bow. There were places in the empire where taxes had increased significantly. The emperor continued to speak firmly and clearly. He walked through the rows. Then he came to Magnus, who was also standing with his head tucked into the floor. What a disappointment! The man looked at him with obvious disgust. He gritted his teeth. He ordered the man to stand up. It was not proper for the Grand Duke to wipe the floor in the presence of such dignitaries. Magnus raised his head. There was pure horror and nightmare on his face. He listened and didn't say a word. The emperor asked him who should sit on the throne. The man immediately replied that it was the emperor, your majesty. So it's okay if he gives the final verdict? The man smiled and looked at him. Magnus said it was his will. The emperor looked around at them all and said, "They seem to be gloomy. Why would that be?" The man walked to his throne and sat on it. It was time to continue the hearing. The man bowed his head and watched with interest. He turned to the representative of the middle chamber and ordered him to outline what was going on. He immediately looked at the representative of the upper house and literally saw the man looking at him with hatred. At that moment, the poor man regretted that he had cooperated with Magnus. His life was in danger now. What a bastard. He remembered when he'd signed the deal that had become his death sentence. Magnus had been very slippery then and assured him that he was worth trusting and even gave him a gift. In that chest were many gold coins. Even the most sophisticated man could not resist such a bounty. The man began to stammer, searching for the right words, but nothing came to mind. He had trusted this duke for nothing after all. The emperor chuckled and said that this man was of no use to him. He seemed to be upset about something. Then he turned to the Chamber of Commoners. Cain stood and trembled with fear. The man was terrified. The emperor asked in a firm voice, could someone tell him what he had missed? The man nodded his head and said that at the moment, the second empress was under arrest on charges of murdering the emperor, and was now explaining to him the right to call a witness. The emperor interrupted him halfway through and said that he was ready to give his verdict. The prince is innocent. Does anyone have an objection? As we know, no one had an objection. Everyone bowed and acknowledged the wisdom of this decision. The man sighed. Judging from what was happening, Grand Duke Magnus had done a lot of things during his absence. In addition, from this moment on, he is removing him as a judge, blessed by the goddess of justice. He approached Magnus and asked if he agreed to this. The man just nodded his head. Good, now he can do what he wants. The emperor looked at him with a fierce gaze. First, he swore to judge the accused without bias. The man swung around to slap him. There was a clap, and he slapped him so hard that the man almost spat out all his teeth. Secondly, he should have watched out for the other nobles. The man slapped him again, which was much stronger, and watch out for public opinion, which he didn't actually do. Another clap was heard. All the jurors recoiled in fear. The emperor waved his hand, and third, he teamed up with his son and became the rat that began to devour the empire. The emperor was truly disappointed. He looked at him with weeping eyes. His face was red from the beating. He tried to justify himself and said that he lost sleep when he was afraid that the citizens would starve. The king was furious at this, so he raised taxes on 10 types of grain this year, approved it, and sent it to his son. He stood there and didn't know what to say. All the accusations were accurate. The man didn't know what to do now. Fear had completely taken over his body. He said he didn't see an ounce of responsibility in his words. The emperor was furious. The emperor turned to the 4th and 5th great weapon masters. The two men stood up. The man said that from now on, Magnus is a first-class criminal. Let them take him away. Like a dog and lock him in a dungeon, Magnus was terrified. Magnus tried to make excuses and break free of the two men's heavy grip, but they held him tight. He shouted that it was some kind of conspiracy, but His Majesty did not believe him. He just looked at his traitor servant who dared to go against his will. He was dragged towards the exit. The man tried to shout for something. However, it was too late. He was under arrest. A conspiracy? The man sighed. Right, maybe there was a conspiracy. And he listened to this conspiracy. The man looked at his son who stood behind him and stared back at him. 4 days ago, in the Emperor's reception room, they sat talking. The Emperor looked at his son with a surprised look. He was now asking him to kill himself, a begging sign. The little prince sat in front of him and nodded his head. Yes, that's it. There was no doubt in his words. The man folded his arms across his chest and told him to continue. The boy said he had no patience to watch his brother's pathetic actions. The Emperor leaned back and asked, what did this even have to do with his death? The boy began to explain. If the Emperor dies, based on his brother's character, he would try to eliminate him, just for the fact that he is like an eyesore. The Emperor was starting to get bored. He looked at the boy and asked, so what? The boy replied that this behavior is among the childish. But is this what grown men do? Before doing so, he would want to humiliate him publicly, blaming him for his death and holding a public hearing. The Emperor approached him and said that it seems the boy has some cunning plan to overcome the situation. The boy clapped his chest and smiled. That's right, he has a plan. But a smile appeared on his face. Yes, that plan is already in place. The Emperor put his hand to his chest and smiled. The man seemed to believe him. So, it's time to conclude this trial and release his prince from custody. In addition, the Emperor paused. Arrest his eldest elephant prince for attempting to assassinate the Emperor. The first principal tried to justify himself. He was dragged under his arms, but there was no way he could break free. The boy looked at all this and inwardly rejoiced. Finally, he could get even with this fucker. He shouted, but no one listened to him. He was just dragged under the arms, and no one paid attention. He was dragged behind the accused tribune and presented to the guards. The prince screamed, but no one cared about him. As soon as the first prince saw the Emperor, he immediately began to justify himself and shouted that it was only a conspiracy of that thing called Kaoli. The Emperor looked at him with a fierce look and smiled. Did he look like his father now? What was the reason for him calling his name without respect? As soon as the prince heard that, goosebumps ran down his back. He didn't expect such a direct you from his father. The boy immediately apologized and addressed the Emperor with proper deference. A chill ran down his back. The players stood nearby and sighed heavily. Let him freak out. What does it matter to him? Everything is going according to plan. In addition, another user had sponsored him for as much as 500 coins. That's not bad. It was the same user who had insulted him. Now he was apologizing. The boy smiled and pressed the button. That was a good try. The Emperor raised his hand up and said that now they would start a fair trial, not the same as before. But he was interrupted. The boy interrupted him and told him to wait a bit. Not long ago, he was standing behind the stand of the accused, so let them ask him. He felt insulted. That was it. Yes, that's how he felt. Everyone else began to murmur, wow. He had interrupted the Emperor. Now he wouldn't have any luck. The Emperor smiled and told his son to continue. There was genuine joy on his face. The boy thanked him and continued. So, from all of the above, he would like to personally prove his brother's guilt. He asked for a chance to prove his innocence and bring out the true culprit. The Emperor put his foot on his leg and smiled and said that he would give his permission. The man was really curious about what would happen. The others were indescribably horrified at this. The Emperor had given him his permission. Everyone else was shocked. The boy thanked the Emperor and smiled, his eyes shining. Yes, it's hard to believe it if you were the Emperor everyone knows, but he'd rather take him out of here for such a liberty. But it's all part of the plan. The guy started his presentation. Now he was on a horse. Here we go. Defendant, they're starting the elephant trial. The boy came up and asked the name of the first prince. He didn't know what to say. He was furious. His eyes became angry. According to the will of the law, refusing to answer could result in a decision without hearing the case. So he asks him to answer. The first principal clenched his fist and tried to control himself. He was filled with rage. How dare this little asshole? However, he still answered. He clenched his teeth and nodded his head. The boy continued, then let him get straight to the main question. Then in that case, he would get to the main question. The boy asked him if he was going to attempt an assassination attempt on the Emperor. The elephant was silent. He just stood there staring fiercely before him, anger boiling in his soul. The guy repeated his question. Was he going to kill the emperor? His voice sounded cold and clear. The boy couldn't stand it and slapped his hand on the table. This is some kind of nonsense. The rage was bursting out after all. He screamed, but he was powerless for now. Everything was against him, and the boy didn't know what to do. He was just thrashing around in powerless rage. The guy asked him if he had any evidence to refute the accusation. Under normal circumstances, the demand to show proof of innocence would be less than measure not summer, but the lad knew how he would react under such pressure. The first prince began to laugh. His laughter turned to hysterical laughter. Soon, he burst out with fur. It seemed the guy was starting to get a little crazy with everything that was going on. What a cheeky bastard. Proof? Did he say proof? He had a devilish grin on his face. He's being catered to by his attempts to imitate the emperor. He moved closer to his younger brother and began to speak, his voice turning to a growl. Does he want to take over as emperor? The elder prince looked at him almost point blank, the tension gradually building. He grabbed his shoulder and kept talking. He didn't know who had to do such a thing, but it wouldn't be in vain. He moved closer to his little brother and said that the brat would fall to his knees right now and beg for forgiveness, but he might change his mind. The boy took his hand off his shoulder and said that there was a trial going on right now, so they'd let the formalities pass for now. If he was standing in front of him, the same innocent boy who was easily manipulated, he would believe his only brother. Well, not yet. He recalled moments from the diary, 9:44, February 19th, his birthday. Guy had talked to his brother then. The emperor was sad. What could he do to make him happy? His older brother patted him on the head. When he asked his older brother, he smiled and said that his father loved magical animals, so he would be very happy if he asked for a magical animal for his birthday. The next day, now he was 10 years old from the genus. He asked his father for a magical animal as a birthday present, but got a slap instead. The next day, his faithful servant asked in surprise, "What happened?" The boy was lying in his bed crying. He said not to worry and promised to find out what had gone wrong. Why did his attempts to soothe his tears only make it worse? The next day, the boy went to his secret laboratory. He created a secret space under his room without his father's knowledge and offered a gold coin to the servant for his, but he didn't accept it. In the future, he will give him many magical animals. The boy thinks he will sleep well tonight. The next day, the boy went to his secret laboratory. He created a secret space under his room without his father's knowledge and offered a gold coin to the servant for it, but he didn't accept it. In the future, he will give him many magical animals. The boy thinks he will sleep well tonight. It was like everything inside of him was turning upside down. The guy couldn't believe what happened. The next day, something happened that boy couldn't believe. His father found the magical animals he was raising and got terribly angry. He trembled with fear and was ordered to burn them with his own hands. However, how did he know? The boy still could not believe it. Tears flowed down his cheeks. He hadn't told anyone besides his brother from his servant. At that moment, he began to have suspicions. Did the servant really say it? It couldn't be. He didn't want to think about it anymore. On the 23rd of May, 9:48, he did burn all his animals. It left a lasting impression and trauma on him. He went to a commoner's bar to get drunk. No one would recognize him there. He wanted to drown his sorrows with alcohol. Then he promised himself to raise magical animals again, but not to tell his brother about it. At this moment, anger settled in his soul. The magical beast hunters were sitting next to him and bragging about the results of today's hunt. Without noticing, he threw down his mug and shouted. The guy had gotten another magical beast after all, and it was a big wolf. It seemed that animals were better than humans. He was more and more convinced of that every day. Now, in his body was a different person who was delivering justice. Real justice, not a fake trial. He said that they would now proceed with the trial. The elder prince shouted, "Well, if he wants proof, he summons the beastman who was guarding the defendant as a witness." The guy looked at the guard and told him to take his seat. The guard obediently stood behind the tribune. The first prince said he would ask the guards a question. The guard tensed up. He fumbled in his pocket and found a ring that could be used to control magical beasts. The boy took it out, hid it discreetly in his handkerchief, and asked a question that would justify him. A smile appeared on his face. Who did the guard see in the king's reception room? Now he would have everything in his pocket. He has the ring controlling these creatures, so he has unbreakable witnesses that will ensure his innocence. Controlling in speech is easy. All you have to do is think about it. The guy points the ring right at the guard. Just that little asshole is going to lose today. The prince stood there and didn't say anything. He just watched. The guard started to speak, his lips moving and his voice sounding quiet for now. The guard said in a firm voice that it was the Elephant Prince who was there. His eyes lit up with a bright yellow flame. The man definitely didn't expect such a thing. What did he just say? How was this possible? He clutched the ring in his hands. The guard said he was blessed by the goddess of victory, and with all the honor of his knight, confidently states that it was the Elephant Prince. The man was ready to fall over with fear. He couldn't believe what was happening. How could this be? He has the ring. The emperor looked at him and asked with a kind of mockery, "What is it?" He looks like he's upset about something, just as the emperor had that ring on his finger. What's bothering him? The emperor continued to look at him and looked at him as if he was mocking him. What a fucking joke. He waved his hand, and the ring slowly lit up with a red light. The Elephant Prince shuddered in fear. If the emperor had the real control ring now, then he was dead. Well, he had no more tricks up his sleeve. The man lowered his head and accepted defeat. He unclenched his hands, and the ring in his handkerchief slipped out. With a loud sound, the metallic object began to roll across the floor, heading straight for the younger principal. It rolled up to his foot and stopped right in front of the boy. The one lowered his eyes and looked directly at his feet. The boy bent down and picked up the small cold object in his hands. He looked at it with a steely gaze, while the elder prince was simply furious. He himself had handed them the proof of his guilt by depriving them of the burden of the search. Now, he is definitely guilty. He is accused of attempting to assassinate the emperor. The prince was terrified. He didn't even know what to say. He had every emotion possible on his face. The boy looked at the emperor and continued speaking. The ring the defendant was holding was painfully familiar. "His Majesty, does he have anything to say?" The emperor smiled and said in a joyful voice, "It looks very familiar. It looks identical to the ring he uses to control the guards, and which was created by a master craftsman. However, it is a fake made by a greedy apprentice using stolen blueprints, not even close to the original created by the master." The eldest prince was horrified. The emperor looked at him again with a fierce look and smiled at him and told him to stop tarnishing his name with his presence. The younger prince raised his hand and addressed the emperor. "If he doesn't mind, can he make the final judgment?" The man nodded. The eldest prince was furious. He gritted his teeth, but realized that there was nothing he could do. He was completely powerless here. The man shouted that he would not accept this. This is a court that doesn't obey any rules. Besides, take away this arrogant bastard who for some reason thinks he can judge him. The guy was pointing his finger at his junior prince. "Besides, there are people here who are gossiping, but they took money from him themselves. I don't accept any of this." The guy was surprised and raised an eyebrow. He even admitted to taking bribes himself. "That's just great." The boy said that since he had gotten this far, let him ask the audience. Would any of the jurors present like to come forward in defense of the Elephant Prince? Everyone else fell silent. They began to look amongst themselves. No one even dared to say a word. The prince looked around at everyone with his hunted cat gaze, looking for support, but no one seemed to even think of helping him in such a situation. The guy started to speak. If no one wanted to, then with the judge's permission, he would give the final verdict. Inside himself, he pondered. Poor guy. The associates he bought with money turned away at the most crucial moment, and now the outcome is obvious. Since the accusation of assassination was confirmed, please have them arrest the prince immediately. Immediately, the guards swooped down and grabbed him under the arms. Madmen, immediately, let them release him. The prince was still screaming. The boy turned to his emperor again. He asked that before he was taken away, could he give the criminal a message? The emperor grinned and asked why. The boy replied that he had been falsely accused, so he would like to get a little payback. The emperor nodded affirmatively, and the boy thanked him. The elder prince was furious. He had not experienced such humiliation in a long time. The prince began to speak. He said he would tell him at once. Let it be taken as partial payback for all he had done to him. The elder prince looked at him with frightened eyes. He saw the boy rubbing his hands together. "This is going to hurt a little bit, brother." The boy swung his arm to give him a huge slap. His hand glowed blue, and a loud slapping sound was heard. He gave him a huge slap, besides putting all his strength into it. Secondly, he laughed at justice, at the emperor, and at everyone present. The boy was getting furious. He did it for his own gain. The prince is very disappointed. Guy clenched his fist to deliver the final blow. His fist came down on the elder prince's face and immediately broke his nose. Guy grasped his bleeding nose and looked at his brother in horror. And thirdly, because of his own greed, he did something else. He tried to kill their father. That in itself is not disappointing but disgusting. The king sat and watched all of this. The pendant around his neck began to shine and crack. The boy looked at everyone with serious eyes and said that the message had been passed. He clapped his hands. Now, it was time to give the final verdict. He said this in a cold and emotionless voice. He looked at his elder brother lying on the floor, choking on his own blood, and continued speaking. The elder prince had done something unimaginable, an act unbecoming of a prince. The poor man was lying on the floor, not saying a word, just sobbing quietly, trying to stop the blood. Kim continued to say, everyone else should know about his sins, so the criminal should be tied to horses and dragged through the settlements. The eldest prince came to be horrified. Besides, they asked the gods for justice and forgiveness. Let the court and the judge give a fair sentence. That's the end of it. The boy shrank back. The moment was incredibly crucial, and he was only a little bit away from the chosen ending. The emperor stood up and nodded his head. He said he thought the decision was fair. What did the others think? All the people started whispering and saying that it was a great decision. No one had any objections. The emperor slammed his hand on his throne and said it was a good judgment, fair. The eldest prince was to be tied to horses and dragged through all the cities of the empire. The guy covered his nose with his hand and tried not to freak out. Additionally, there was something else. Next, he was to have his head chopped off and hung from the tallest spire in the city for a month for the edification of the rest of the city. The boy was terrified. Everyone is equal before the imperial laws. That's the end of it. The session was over. The lad was dragged away, and his piteous screams echoed throughout the hall. The first knight, or rather the player who was in his body, dragged the prince, who tried unsuccessfully to break free and screamed. The emperor stood up and said that if that was the end of it, the jury could dismiss, but the boy interrupted him. He raised his hand and asked, since the first prince was no longer a prince, could he be considered a prince and not an heir? The emperor paused and asked, does this have anything to do with the court? The boy shook his head. No, but it should be voiced right now. The emperor thought for a moment and said he would listen. First of all, the guy apologized for speaking on unrelated things. The reason he wants to voice it now is because of one thing. There are people in their hall right now who are driving their empire to prosperity, so here it is. The emperor didn't understand anything and asked, what's this all about? The man frowned. The boy lifted his head up and said he dares to say something. He aspires to get closer to the gods that watch from on high. Furthermore, he wants to become the son of the empire that will light its way, so he is now asking permission from the emperor. In the face of the empire, the gods of this place, in the name of the empire, the center of this world, he appeals to the only supreme power, the son of the empire, the emperor. Asking you to become the next emperor while offering you resignation, the man sat there without moving. A smile suddenly appeared on his face. He began to chuckle, and the ring on his hand began to burn. The man did start laughing after all. His words that he had just heard lacked any fairness or justification. The emperor stood up and took a few quick steps towards the boy. There was something about it, though. For the first time, he liked this demand. He walked over to the lad and put his hand on his shoulder. He turned to the rest of the jury, who opened their mouths in surprise and apologized for it happening in such a place. This will be the emperor's last order. He raised his hand and raised his voice. Now, at this moment of sober mind and bright state of memory, he hands over his throne to his son. He is handing over the title of emperor to him. The man pressed his son against him, who stood and did not utter a word. It was finally over. The guy exhaled. Everything had gone perfectly according to his plan, so it would be possible to sleep well. However, suddenly something changed. Time around literally froze, stopped, and the boy felt it. Everything around him felt like it was in a black and white movie. Everything stopped in the same positions it was in at the last moment. The boy looked at his hand. His body began to weaken. It felt like he was shedding his clothes. He saw his body begin to delaminate and literally dissolve into thin air. It all started too suddenly. Everything was disappearing. He was even a little frightened, although it was understandable. The emperor standing next to him had already started to dissolve. This can't be happening. The guy was scared to death. He felt like he was dying. He was now standing in some strange place completely white. Was this the place of administration? Suddenly, a sign appeared to his right, a sign congratulating him on the successful completion of the 5th floor. The guy turned his head and asked, "What's the admin?" An affirmative answer appeared on the icon. He looked in front of him and asked what was required of him now. In front of him, a sign popped up to make him the administrator of this game. The guy didn't even have time to answer anything, as the signs with only one word started circling around him. You will. He grabbed his head and tried to come to his senses. It was literally driving him crazy. The guy didn't know what to do. Everything was happening too fast. He couldn't control it. Then, second plaques, if you refuse, death, death. If you refuse, the player dies. The guy screamed that he was refusing. It was incredibly scary. Scary that he had no choice. Suddenly, everything disappeared as fast as it appeared, and the boy found himself in some abyss that was exclusively black. The administrator asked, is he not at all worried about his future begging sign? The boy was breathing heavily. He said that if the boy refused, it would kill him, right? Out of this darkness, two burning eyes appeared and squinted at the boys. Silence reigned for a second. The test passed, but the boy pressed the button. There was still time. Everything around began to spin. Walls disintegrated, people dissolved into thin air, literally before his eyes. The little prince stood in the middle of it all and understood nothing. It was as if the boy had woken up from a dream. He stood there wondering what had just happened to him. The boy couldn't come to his senses for a few more seconds. Now, however, he felt someone's hand on his shoulder, and he twitched a little. He looked at his father standing next to him. The emperor looked at him and asked, he wanted to say. Boy, I was still looking at him with frightened eyes. He's an emperor now. For him, a new title is going to be a big responsibility. The guy apologized and tried to smooth things over. He was terribly embarrassed at this point. The emperor, now ex-emperor, said that it was not appropriate for him to apologize now. The little prince looked at him and smiled. The man looked at his son, and with a wink, told him that he was no longer emperor in these parts. He was handing him the title, Emperor of the Kaoli. The boy still couldn't believe it and looked at his father. He nodded his head and said he would take it into consideration. Today they would celebrate. The man put his arm around his son and cheered up. The man was not like himself. He held out his hand and asked, who wants a drink? Today is such a great occasion. Everyone shouted yes. The party began and lasted until almost morning. At that time, the eldest prince was led downstairs to detention. He was in the basement where the most dangerous prisoners were kept. All this time, the guy still couldn't believe what had happened. It just didn't make sense. It can't be. Suddenly, he noticed the guard's gaze on him, and he definitely didn't like it. He gritted his teeth and swam with rage. He twitched and screamed. Is he laughing at him? The man was already thrashing in agony. Then he felt a powerful palm hit him in the face, and his nose started to hurt. The sun flew far away. There's no time for this now. The guard exhaled heavily. Fuck him. Fucking Kim. He laughed, looking at the chat room. The viewers were saying that the stream was very boring. I can't wait for it to be over. Suddenly, a sign appeared in front of him that said he had lost. He couldn't believe what he was seeing for a few seconds. His opponent had gotten the emperor ending. So he was now the loser. What? The guy was stunned. The next message said that since he couldn't get to that ending, he was about to feel the end of the world with his whole body. Suddenly he felt the prince grab his arm. Goosebumps immediately ran down his back as he saw the rage splashing in the prince's eyes. And up here, everyone was celebrating. There was an unbearable joy here, an atmosphere of general happiness. They now had a new emperor. Everyone else welcomed the young emperor who would now rule their country. The boy walked through his domain. He went to the window and looked out. Had the festivities already begun? The boy looked at the main hallway. He scratched the back of his head. The boy had gotten permission from the emperor, or rather his father. Well, first he had to finish some things, and then he would go to the rest of the locations. He stopped near the door, and as if he was thinking about something for a second, he kept hesitating to pull up the doorknob. Finally, he grasped the steel handle and pulled it toward him. Opening the door, he saw before him a huge room, completely hung with paintings and luxurious chandeliers. The lad went forward with a quick and confident step, approaching his intended goal. Then he stopped, and even for a second held his breath. He could not believe that he was right here. It was just something he had imagined. The guy looked in front of him, looked up, and froze for a second. He had imagined something. The boy stopped in front of the picture of his character's mother, that he should come here first, stay here, at least for a little while. At this time, his opponent sat in the room and looked at the phone. He held his head in grief. On the screen was a boy, the youngest prince. The boy looked at him in tears. He was wiping away his tears. If he made it to the 5th floor, if he could only make it, he would come and support him. The boy sat at his smartphone and held back the tears that were pouring out by themselves. The guy inhaled and calmed down. He relaxed his breathing and closed his eyes a little. That's it. They're waiting for him. So to go, the guy moved forward to the others, who were already celebrating. Yeah, just like the audience said, this world isn't real. Everything here is fake and doesn't need attention. There's nothing to hold on to. Besides, he's not a prince, just a man who's in his body out of choice. But the guy hopes that now this boy will finally be happy. A happy smile appeared on his face. He approached the door and grabbed the handle. The cold metal pierced the coldness of his whole body. When he opened the door, he saw his father and the rest of the people who were celebrating. There was an atmosphere of complete merriment. 17 hours left until the automatic transition and the completion of the mission. The guy was lying in his bed with his stuff strewn about. He felt as lousy as possible, like he'd been run over by a truck. He begged for water. The guy had a terrible hangover. Oh, he was drunk. The audience looked at him and laughed. Yeah, silly to argue he'd had too much to drink, to put it mildly. I mean, he could refuse when offered, but everyone was too insistent. What demons. The poor guy stood up and tried to hold back the gagging. His mouth felt like a cat had pooped in it, and he tried to come to his senses somehow. In the chat room, they laughed at him. That's it. It's time to bury him. The player is dead. But the boy turned off the broadcast so that the others would not distract him. There was an icon that there was no signal. He sighed heavily. It was almost a disaster. Stealth mode disables the video, leaving the chat active. But there was no sound either. The viewers in the chat were telling him to use the coins he had been donated yesterday. The guy wiped his head and gave a surprised look. He apologized and said he couldn't remember shit. He was hungover, so his head was all messed up. The guy tried to excuse himself. He said his brain just wasn't working right now. Everything was so lousy that he wanted to fall through the ground. But suddenly, he saw something that made his heart skip a beat. He had earned 16,500 coins. That amount of money made his eyes widen. How much did they donate to him yesterday? Everyone else started laughing as the prince began to sway from side to side. He checked the donation history. The user love sponsored again by as much as 10,000 coins. He sent a voicemail message praising the boy and saying he did a great job. The boy didn't understand a damn thing. Now he has a lot of money, but he doesn't know what to spend it on. As soon as he saw such a significant amount of money, he immediately started bowing and thanking, saying he would try even harder. Is he finally being recognized? Since this user had donated so much money, and this was within the 5th floor, he must have done his best. The boy saluted and said he'd check a couple more places, then head to the next floor. The boy knocked on his father's door and said he was coming in. The former emperor was reading a book. The man took off his glasses and greeted the boy. He looked tired. The boy stood in front of him and, putting his hand on his chest, said that he finally got to see him. There was joy on the boy's face. The man sighed and said that the boy should have rested a little longer. There was a lot to prepare for. The boy reassured him, saying that everything would be all right. First, it was worth meeting him. The man put the book down and said that the boy seemed to want to shoot something to talk about. What was it about? The boy brushed it off and said it was nothing. He had just recently reread his journal and wanted to ask something. When he was a kid, when he asked him to buy a magical animal, his father reacted extremely negatively, so he wants to know something different. Why did he do that? The man looked at him with a serious look and apparently realized that he couldn't avoid this conversation. How did the boy manage to anger him? The emperor sighed heavily. He still doesn't know, so the servant didn't tell him after all. Okay, there was no reason to hide it any longer. The man looked tiredly at the boy. When he looked at his son's collection, which was a lot of exotic animals, he had a thought. He saw among these animals those who were ready to be mad at this moment. Their eyes were really full of rage. The boy finally began to realize, and the maddened beast. So that's what this is all about. The emperor exhaled. He thought that due to his lack of experience in raising animals, it would be dangerous. But soon, he realized that the reason for this whole mess was something else. He looked at his son. He thinks now he realizes who it was. The man had said he was tormented by mixed emotions, but there was a reason for that too. He clenched his eyes. He saw his son as his own mother. It was a pathetic sight, a behavior that made him easy to manipulate, and he couldn't take it anymore. The man realized that he seemed to have blabbed too much, and said that if he had satisfied his curiosity, it could go. He's on a tight schedule, so don't let him waste time. The man immediately stared at the book and collapsed on the couch again. The kid said he'd come back. The boy was about to leave the door, but stopped and turned to his father. The man looked at him with a surprised look. What else did he want? The boy bowed and said, thanking him for loving and raising this disgusting creature until the very end. Having said that, the guy turned around and quickly left the room. The emperor sat there for a few more seconds, and didn't understand anything. He was ready to laugh. He couldn't stand it, and hit himself with a book right in the face. That's the devil. He changed a lot when he became emperor. I'll have to learn a lot more. The man began to laugh. His son looked funny after all. The guy ran out of the settlement and sighed heavily. That was it. He was done. Now there was still someone to say goodbye to, and he needed to go to the next floor. In his chat started gossiping. He couldn't take a knight with him. Physical strength is great, but the guy didn't want to hear anything. Magical engineering is a cool topic. The guy kept walking to the workshop. Approaching the familiar gate, the guy knocked. The master was already inside and was pulling his pipe. Who's there? The man smiled and asked wryly, Is that the sunshine of the empire has come down to their level? The guy walked up to him and said he came to express his gratitude. How does he feel? The man said, Let her leave her pointless worries. He'd lost a drinking battle to him, and already he's worrying, and he's a small one at that. The man said this without any malice. The guy laughed. He apologized for going to hell. The old man waved him off and said that it was time to end this lyric. He came for the gloves he made? The boy nodded. The old man frowned and said seriously, This stuff is pretty unstable, so let him be careful. He doesn't know why the kid would want this dangerous thing, but if it's his will, let him have it. The boy thanked him point blank. The old man looked at him over his back and squinted his eyes. He saw the boy bow respectfully. He has manners after all, even though he is the emperor. The boy said, Let him stay healthy and create many more wonderful inventions. As soon as the man saw this, he waved his hands and shouted, You're the emperor. He's also bowing? He couldn't believe it. You'd think they'd never see each other again. The old man started muttering something to himself, and the boy smiled. The old man gave him his invention, and the boy walked back with the box in his hands. That's where his glove was. After the test was over, this whole place, along with the people, would disappear. The boy was even a little sad. 13 hours to go. This boy's unjust death will become part of history again. He hopes that the time spent here on this floor will be of any use. The guy started to feel sad. At the same time, there were several other people on the third floor trying unsuccessfully to get through. A man was climbing the stairs heavily. It was incredibly difficult for him. He didn't expect the ordeal to be so difficult. It was one of those people who, inspired by the example of the protagonist, chose high difficulty. His name was Beck. So, where's the portal? The guy looked around the place, but there was no portal to the next level. He looked at the scroll that was lying next to him. Those fucking things. He's risking his life here and they're fucking around. Here on this piece of paper was written the following. The year 957 of the Empire. For the first time in history, a just ruler has ascended the throne without a shadow of misbehavior. A wise emperor, full of courage. All the citizens were incredibly happy and constantly praised him. And the nobles bowed in awe and respect and didn't even dare to cross his orders. Happy sounds of celebration resounded throughout the empire. The others in the chat room couldn't even believe it. There was a different story there. If you are a wanderer reading this, I beg you, may you never play with the good heart of our emperor. On the throne sat the now former prince and now emperor of Kaoli. Signed, faithful servant and loyal friend, Fordrick. A man now with a small beard sat and quickly wrote down this text on papyrus to leave it in the ages. The guy at the time was getting ready to move on to the next level. Since they were done now, need to check on his furries. The guy shouted and called out to his servant. The chat started to get indignant. Later, what's with the shout? The servant appeared literally out of nowhere. He regarded him, bowed, and greeted his master. He was one step ahead as always. The guy looked at him and asked in a serious tone, did he find out why his pets were in such a state? The man bowed and said that it was impossible for now, but he was trying. In addition, he managed to find out something. These animals have no symptoms of insanity. At the moment, there is no anomaly, so he is not very worried. The boy hesitated and let him go. The servant bowed and immediately disappeared somewhere, went to do his business. The boy rejoiced after this news. Well, since no anomalies have been detected, he will go and get his animals. There is nothing to worry about. Hooray! Better emperor! Chat cheered. Guy walked over to his hiding place and began to look for the animals, which were standing in one of the cages. The popoi were in the cage and seemed to be resting. There was a slight snore coming from them. They seemed to be sleeping. They immediately perked up as soon as they heard the familiar footsteps. As soon as the boy approached them, the animals immediately greeted him with a smile. How were they feeling? They seemed perfectly fine. They just needed to rest. Now the boy opened the door. It seems his servant was taking good care of them. Pretty good. The animals looked at him with eyes full of love. The boy reached out his hand, and one of the fuzzies licked him. His tongue was warm and rough. The boy was opening the cage. As soon as the cage opened, even a little, the critters rushed right at him without waiting and squealed with joy. Of course, they hadn't seen him for a whole week. The pets immediately began to cling to him and purr. The guy started stroking his pets, who tried to cling to him even more. In the chat room, we're not so suspicious of magical engineering, someone even thought to do the same point. The guy picked up his pets and headed back. He had already finished what he was doing, so it was time to knock out the chat. Someone had suggested setting up chaos lately. At least let him play with his pets. The guy let the fuzzies out and they immediately started bouncing around on the floor. The sight was cute. He walked into his lab and approached the table where the gauntlet was already lying. The critters followed him all the time. They missed him terribly. The guy looked at his gauntlet. This thing was too unstable, as I said, master, so one must take here responsibility. But he will try, though it will be too difficult to deal with the magic circle. While he fixes one part, a completely different part breaks. Fix it again, something else breaks. It's an endless circle of breakdowns that makes you respect Reynolds all the more. This man, this famous genius of magical engineering that he learned about from the video, the history of magical engineering in the tower, was divided into before and after his appearance. The guy kept working on his invention. He's no genius, but he can't just give up. 10 minutes to go. He seemed to be finished. Something glowed inside the magic glove. Does he seem to have succeeded? Really? In this form, it can be used already. The guy looked at the result of his actions and smiled. Basically, it was no big deal. He concentrated and felt the energy spilling over his body, and now it seemed to work. The glove began to fill with mana, the light spreading stronger and stronger. The guy could feel the energy building up there. Enough mana had accumulated there, and he tried to move his hand. Sure, there was a slight delay, but it was better than it could get. After all, it was his first invention. He realized that this thing was more useful than it was supposed to be. The guy started to smile. He was happy with his invention. Not bad at all, not bad at all. Now there was an alarm clock that said that the time of staying at this location was exhausted. The guy, along with Fluffy, looked over there. The chat pause time was over. The chat would be back on. As soon as the guy saw this, it immediately changed in his face. He started laughing. He apologized to the others. He needed to concentrate, and completely, he forgot about them. There was already a little riot going on. 5 seconds left. The room he was in began to dissolve into thin air. Now moving to the next floor was imminent. The boy took on his usual appearance, and a portal immediately began to appear in front of him, growing in size with each passing moment. A message popped up in front of him. He had reached the end and passed the test. The way to the 6th floor is open. The boy stepped forward with confidence. However, it wasn't that simple. A prohibition to go inside appeared. The user is deactivated, beginning to transfer viewers of another stream of the same floor. God, yes, what happened? It was some strangers. It seems to be Sonia's people. The guy didn't want to ruin the atmosphere in the chat room, so deactivated the chat room for viewers who added in the last 12 hours. It was much better that way. Guy suggested to calm down a bit and check the reward. He needed to settle this situation. He pressed the button that was responsible for calling the level reward. As soon as he did that, a box appeared from whence you came and started falling down. The gift stopped right in front of him, and the guy was a bit dumbfounded. He was confused about something. Immediately, voicemails started coming to him, one after another, criticizing everyone. The guy decided to put a limit of 500 coins. These people will not give him such a large amount of money given that they came from another stream. This is the way to solve the problem. An Onion user sponsored him for 1,000 coins. There was a voicemail message. Honey, are you sleeping? He dreams of being able to write, so we'll let Write pity him and begs for his pity. He will even shave his head if he wants to. Let him remove the ban. The guy laughed and said he wouldn't let him. Let's open the award. As soon as he opened it, it was just normal clothes, kind of weird for a reward. Maybe it has some properties. There's no option to get an extra reward, so who the hell knows what he's using it for? The guy took the clothes. It seems he was starting to guess if the admin was provoking him. Well, that was to be expected. The guy smiled and realized he shouldn't do that. Kind of a message from the receptionist. He's trying to say he's the same guy as in the video, implying that he can't do whatever he wants. The guy put his clothes down. Ass went to the clothes and started to chew on them, but realized in time that he wasn't tasty. No, it's not a rock. The boy yelled at him not to eat it. The boy opens the next box. I wonder what will be in there. His pet sat next to him and seemed upset. There's nothing tasty in there. Opening another box, the boy saw something beautiful in there. His eyes lit up with joy. It was the leather shoes of a 7 serpent master. Rank heroic. shoes with which he controlled the snakes. Each shoe has its own properties, made from the skin of the snake died after childbirth. Keeps the abilities of the snake. Now that's the fucking thing. The guy immediately rushed to pull on the shoes. He did not understand what this administrator had in mind. That shoe was sitting on him. Great. There's a reason why no one is surprised by the subject of heroic rank. This stuff is very hard to control. It's unstable, so it's dangerous. A boy tried to climb a wall with these shoes. However, I wonder how dangerous they are. The boy Kim saw in the video tried to climb the wall but immediately fell off. Poor guy went straight down where the river was raging. It's hard to control things like that. The boy sighed. He couldn't use such things himself, so he had to learn from others. He opened his eyes, which immediately lit up with the blue color of mana. With magic and transformation, he had hidden the true appearance of those boots, turning them into the ordinary sneakers he had been wearing before. The chat did not know that these sneakers could be worn so easily, but the boy managed without much difficulty. People were starting to get jealous. The boy scratched the back of his head. He thinks it's okay. The only downside is their bad reputation. It probably helps that he ate the mana stone. The next standard reward was a sack. The guy rummaged around inside and fumbled for a bag of jewelry. There were 5,000 coins in there, standard reward, rank normal. And why do people think that 5,000 coins is not enough now? The discussion continued in the chat room. Kim reflected that he wanted to learn other skills, but with this amount of coins, he could buy that already on the 10th floor. That's the 6th floor, now another challenge. There he would have to work in groups. The guy took a breath. The other people will freak out if they see these fluffy things. The guy shifted his gaze to them. We need to hide them somehow. He opened the space backpack and told Fluffy to get right in there. It was like outer space inside. No one in the chat room agreed, so why bother? However, Fluffy did not hesitate to follow his master's orders and immediately jumped into the backpack. Now, we can go. The guy threw the backpack on his back and moved to the next portal, more like the 10th floor. He didn't care what was going to happen there. If he tried time after time, he might succeed. Besides, there was no limit to the number of attempts. Soon he moved forward. There was a forest. The first thing he saw was a huge tree and a few people sitting around a fire. It was 60 minutes until the first wave started. One of the people sitting there dressed in a knight costume asked, "What about Trial A?" Suddenly they saw a guy. It was Kim. He looked at them from afar. The knight waved at him and asked him if it was cold out there. They've got a fire here, so let him come in and don't be shy. The guy came over and said he was the last one to come. Nice to meet you. People were sitting in their seats and warming themselves by the fire. He immediately threw everyone else a glance to see who was who. The muscular guy is a knight, and the man next to him is apparently a mage. As for this girl, first of all, her outfit was weird as fuck this place. Gas mask, she's wearing a schoolgirl outfit somewhere. The girl seemed to notice his gaze and immediately asked him what he needed to ask for. Suddenly, the girl looked at him. She didn't seem to be particularly benevolent. She said, "Is this the first time he's seen a human being?" She looked at him as if the boy was a piece of shit. His gaze went blank. The girl looked at him without taking her eyes off. The boy was embarrassed and apologized. She just has an interesting mask, he already knew, but her character is so rough, just that he would have to be careful. The knight immediately intervened and tried to prevent a scandal. He waved his hands and said that whether they liked it or not, they had to pass the test together, so it was better not to quarrel and continue. Since a newcomer has joined them, it seems they need to introduce themselves. This guy has running eyes, so he inspires some suspicion. The knight introduces himself first. He punches his chest and says his name is Jong. He's 26 years old, works as a health coach. As they all see that he is a knight, the man took up his sword. He chose high difficulty, so he got the role of Grand Sword Master on the 5th floor on his skills can be put. The other one who was a mage was called Puck. He will fulfill his role, so you don't have to worry about him. As he said, he doesn't adjust to anyone. So as soon as it's over, they will disperse like ships at sea. The boy took a closer look. Apparently, the two of them were at odds. Well, that's not surprising. The knight clapped his hands and said it was the apprentice's turn. The girl stood up and said her name was Seha. She said she couldn't go into details, but she'd learned a little about how to hit and take a punch. And the last boy was Kim. The boy waited for his turn. He smiled and introduced himself. He gave his name and said that in real life he worked in a store and his profession was magical engineer. As soon as they heard his profession, immediately everyone cringed. What a shitty profession. The knight was furious. Magical engineers don't fight on the front lines, do they? The man seemed to be a little disappointed, man. What the hell was he thinking? Are his audience the villains? But Kim didn't understand anything at all. No, he made the decision himself. Didn't the audience try to change his mind? The knight slapped his forehead with his hand. It's crazy. The girl said there's no need to whine. They can fight in threes, right? Old man, isn't he too worried about nothing too? As soon as the knight heard that, he immediately became furious. The girl may not remember due to her age, but there's one thing. Magical engineering? That sucks. The girl didn't seem to be listening to him. The magician told the girl to stop wasting energy. We need to talk about the plan. First, we need to look at their situation. The man seems to have been as focused and at least somewhat adequate as possible. First of all, they're surrounded by a fog, which sucks. It may seem like it's just fog, but it's not. But when you touch it, you realize it's as dense as a wall. In other words, it's the boundary of this floor. Since the knight and the girl are close combat, they'll be fighting on the front lines. It won't be difficult for them. They can easily destroy them if there are enemies there. Since he is a mage himself, he will cover them from the center. And since the guy who is new is not a combat class, he will help the others in the back if they need his help. The knight thought for a moment. He seemed to disagree. Well, not bad, as long as they stick to that strategy, then the non-combat team member's problem. The guy at this time didn't do anything at all, he just listened and smiled. Well, not that they had any wrong reaction, now magical engineers are perceived that way. Anyway, there shouldn't be a problem with it. The guy looked at the sign that appeared literally behind him. Before the first wave of monsters remained 7 seconds, there from the thicket already began to show some creature. He had large horns and a huge, massive body. The first wave began. The creature was making its way through the forest thicket, breaking everything in its path. It had some branching limbs that looked like tree branches. The knight drew his sword from behind his back and readied himself. He had the anticipation of a good battle on his face. He was sure to have fun now. The smile never slipped off his face. The girl checked the chat room. There was something scary. She suggested waiting. The mage standing next to her agreed. There was some shit going on in his chat as well. The knight seemed to be completely confident in his abilities. Hey, he was the 6th Grand Master on the 5th floor. What should he be afraid of here? He immediately moved forward without hesitation to chop the monsters to shreds. The man didn't even think about what dangers might await him there. He struck with his weapon, but the sword just squeaked and hit something very hard. He felt a vibration, but nothing changed. What the fuck was that? Why is it so hard? He tried to hold the ball in his hands, but nothing worked. Suddenly, some weird claw-like paw came out of the fog and flew straight at the man. His sword flew out of his hands and was thrown backwards. He couldn't keep it from vibrating like that. The poor man felt the powerful claws encircle his body and dig into his armor. The pain went in waves throughout his body. He didn't expect this and couldn't do anything. It was almost impossible to break out of this grip. The man began to scream in fear. The monster pulled him by his arms, right to its huge paste. The girl screamed for him to retreat immediately. What a retard. What the hell is he doing there? The monster threw him aside. The man screamed in pain. There was a huge gash on his shoulder. Son of a bitch. The monster immediately disappeared into the fog. A rustling was heard, as if thousands of paws were running on the parquet. The monster continued to clutch him with its claws. The man screamed to be released immediately. Still, the monster loosened its grip, and the man fell straight to the ground. He was incredibly hurt and terrified that he was so close to his death. There was real horror in his eyes, horror that he might lose his life here and now. His eyes widened. He saw a monster appear out of the mist. It was huge. It looked like a huge beetle, the likes of which he had never seen before. It was the Purifier. It shouldn't have appeared on the 6th floor. Despite being the lowest-ranked inhabitants of the Devil region, it was still a monster of a level no lower than the 25th floor. This fight is going to be damn difficult. The others looked with horror at this creature that looked like a huge cockroach. It would be a nightmare for newcomers who had just arrived on the 6th floor. Although I must admit that I expected there to be some kind of trick, but I didn't think the admin would play with the difficulty again. The knight, at this time, was trying to come to his senses and was lying on the ground. It was a cockroach. The man held onto his wounded arm and trembled with fear. Indeed, the creature looked like a cockroach. It had huge eyes, powerful jaws, and 2 large whiskers on its head. It pushed off the ground with its paws and flew straight at them. A rumbling sound was heard. It opened its wings and flew straight at the rest of the points. The monster opened its huge maw full of sharp teeth and flew straight at the knight whom it considered weak prey. The man looked straight into the face of his death. He could already feel the stinking breath of the creature, but he could not do anything. It seemed to him that his whole life would end here. He had already said goodbye to everyone. He was going to die. The man clamped his eyes shut in fear so he wouldn't see the thing. However, suddenly someone's hand reached right there to grab the monster by its mouth. It was a girl. She grabbed the cockroach by one of its fangs and held the monster by it. She stood right in front of it, looking straight into its eyes. The monster started to crack. She was furious that someone dared to take away its prey. She looked up at him with squinted eyes, fully prepared to fight. She exhaled heavily through her gas mask. The beast was repulsive to the touch, cold, slippery, but she continued to hold it by its fangs. They froze in that position for a while longer. The girl clenched her fist, and by all appearances prepared to strike. She put all her strength into that strike. She swung her hand and hit the target, right in the head of the vile creature. A crunch was heard, and the head flew off. The hideous monster's head rolled straight on the ground, leaving a trail of blue blood behind it. All the spectators were shocked. She killed the monsters with one blow. The first wave passed the time left to the second wave, 30 minutes. The girl looked disgusted at her clothes that were stained with this blue muck. Unbelievable. The chat room called her a Van Punchman. The girl turned to the knight, who was out of breath. "Old man, did you write your will yet?" She said to wait, because events are unfolding unusually. Why isn't anyone listening to this? She looked at him with contempt. A weakling who only knows how to do shit. When will he finally grow up? The girl turned around and walked backwards. It was starting to piss her off. This upstart who always thinks he's cooler than everyone else. The girl walked without even turning around. Everyone looked at her with surprise. Weak and incompetent adults like him talk so much and can do so much. The most pathetic creatures on earth. Kim looked at her. This girl in his video was already a known awakened, a strong fighter, so it was better to cooperate with her. She looked at him with a sizzling look, but didn't say anything. A look like that would make anyone a little scared. She looked at the boy's gauntlet. Magical engineering means, the girl pondered. Kim looked at her and didn't say anything. He understood that the girl would not change her behavior. But something seemed familiar to her, and she shifted her gaze to him and took a closer look. It was as if she had seen his face before, but she couldn't remember where and when. The guy looked at her with a completely indifferent look. He stepped on the head of the defeated monster. It was hard and incredibly ugly. But thank God he didn't have to make his move yet, which made it easier. The guy looked at the corpse of the monster. Some more weird user had joined his chat. The schoolgirl chat spy team was back. Ugh, what's wrong with her stream? There seems to be a completely opposite atmosphere to the one here. The guy turned his gaze to the girl who passed by him without even looking in his direction. He didn't really want to talk to her. Everyone thinks she's his daughter and does whatever she wants. And then dramatically dumps her with donations. But no, the people here are loyal only to their emperor. Great Kim. The boy scratched the back of his head, a little embarrassed. The mage looked at the girl and asked what she was doing on the 5th floor that made her so strong. She said it was none of his business. Why is this dude so upset? The atmosphere of his chat room is so sad. The mage bit his tongue. He didn't expect such a harsh answer and preferred to shut up or just didn't know what to say to him. At this time, the wounded knight was sitting somewhere aside and tried to come to his senses. He was very hurt and very ashamed that he had behaved in such a way. Kim went over to him and asked the man how his wounds were. The guy kind of came to his senses and twitched. The guy took his hand and asked him to let him look at his wound. The man's hands were shaking with either fear or rage. The man almost cried. He thought he was the most pathetic man on earth. So fucked up. Now this shame would stay with him forever. The guy said this place could hurt a lot, so it would have to wait. Knight didn't even get it at first. What do you mean? Suddenly, the guy pointed his glove at him, which glowed a bright blue color. The knight didn't even quite realize what was happening. There was a scream. The guy shot him in the arm and lit his wound. It'll hurt, but he won't bleed to death. The mage walked up to him and asked the guy, did he magically engineer that glove? He nodded his head. The man was surprised. Wow, that must have been hard. How did he do it like that? Kakim smiled. Yes, it was difficult, but still accomplished past it. The mage wondered again. Really? He should learn the basics when he got to the 10th floor. They talked like that for a few more minutes, and the girl watched them from the sidelines, and it was starting to piss her off a bit. Even if it was magical engineering, it was still no big deal. She tried her best not to show interest. The mage turned to the girl and said he was impressed with how well she fought. Have her stand forward, and he would support her from the middle. and the magical engineer stays behind as before. Agreed? Everyone seemed to be in agreement. Then everyone looked at the knight. He was still lying somewhere in the distance and whimpered quietly. It seems his mental trauma was too strong. In this state, he'll only be a nuisance, so let him lie there. It's only better if he stays here. The second wave was beginning. The man continued to lie there crying. Several more of the same creatures appeared out of the fog, and there was not just one cockroach, but several. Well, this is going to be tricky. As soon as the chat viewers saw such an abomination, it immediately began to call for a disinfector. You need to spray all this fog. The girl jumped forward, not even thinking that she was in danger. It seemed she was used to fighting face to face. She destroyed the cockroaches one by one, crunching them and sending the nasty Jija flying in different directions. She didn't care about getting dirty now, and wanted to kill them as soon as possible so they would stop bothering her. The huge cockroach looked at her, and it was like something clicked in his head. Their gazes crossed. The girl had nothing but fury in her face. Her gaze was cold, a true killer. In a few leaps, she jumped up to the cockroach and hit it with her fist with all her might. The cockroach crunched and fell to the ground. Its head hung a lifeless piece of meat. Blue blood flowed from its mouth. Chat was ready to vomit right there. It was incredibly disgusting. And the second wave was also past. Only now did the girl notice that her clothes were soiled again. She was furious. There she was in that stuff again. The guy looked at her. She had made it through 2 waves on her own. Respectable. Well, of course they called her a close combat gift for nothing. She was an incredibly strong and talented girl. She had climbed to the 4th floor, only through luck and donations from users. On the 5th floor, she was wandering the streets playing a commoner, a lame idea. Stumbled upon a reclusive master who trained her in melee combat, thus helping her awaken. And after that, rumors of a skinny girl capable of throwing incredible blows gave rise to the nickname, the Gift of Close Combat, that spread throughout the tower. The boy knew she was of the same generation as him, but never thought they would meet under such circumstances. A great blessing to meet her on a level with incredible difficulty. Since there were 2 bugs now, there would be 4 in the next wave, so it was worth preparing. The mage ordered the girl to delay them as much as possible. He'll support her from the back, and this guy, if any slipped through, let him take care of those critters. The man smiled and said he was counting on them. He could finally save face. Seems like he's all about himself. The time left for the 3rd wave is 0 seconds. The others have already prepared. It's not going to be an easy battle, so it's worth the effort if they want to survive. The creatures came again, and from the fog, there was a familiar clicking sound that was already annoying. The girl looked closely and wondered, it was the 3rd wave of beetles, and there were only 2 of them? She didn't care. The main thing was to kill them as quickly as possible. She swung her arm and prepared to run straight into a frontal attack. Pushed off the ground, she literally flew forward. It seemed the bugs were doomed. Kim looked her way and shivered a little. Surely she was going to be okay. And he felt a little uneasy that she was coming so fast. The mage was standing next to him and asked him, also uncomfortable with the begging sign, why are there only 2 of them? Exactly. Something was definitely wrong here. Suddenly the boy heard a squirm not beside him and looked away. There was probably a cockroach there. The little critter had snuck in after all. I wanted to attack. But the boy was ready. So there weren't 2 of those things in the wave at all. The guy gritted his teeth. The cockroach was closing in on him. Just so many coming out at once. And now there would be more. The creature had already shown itself out. It was truly huge. The mage shouted for the guy to retreat back immediately. Kim looked at him but remained standing where he was. The sorcerer began to use his spell and soon he had a fireball in his hands. Now he would charge up and incinerate the thing. Let's go! He threw the fireball straight at the monster, and it flew at the monster with a crackling sound. However, nothing worked. The cockroach just scratched the back of its head in bewilderment and remained completely unharmed. The poor guy didn't even know what to do. A mask of horror appeared on his face. It didn't work at all? What the fuck? He trembled with fear. He couldn't believe that his spell was so weak. This can't be happening. Suddenly, he felt a cold touch, as if someone had placed something metal on his shoulder. Kim told him to step back. He'll figure it out on his own. The guy started picking at his glove, adjusting it to combat mode. The mage obediently stepped back and continued to shake with fear. His chat was cheering. Their emperor was entering the battle. But now, all those bugs were fucked. The girl, meanwhile, continued to fight the bugs, destroying him one by one. The army was thinning with each passing second. Soon she stopped. How is it back there? Are they even all right? The girl looked into the fog where there were already a few beetles. What's going on back there? It didn't work at all. A scream came to her ears, a scream full of terror and despair. So, there were 2 more purifiers. Goosebumps ran down her back. She'd fucked up. The girl was terrified. Several monsters were approaching. They were snapping their huge claws in an attempt to catch the hapless humans. At the last moment, poor girl noticed that a bug was closing in on her and was about to hit her. Damn it, she's lost her guard. It was too late to attack. She was ready for that brood to devour her now. She had to defend herself. The girl covered herself with her arms to soften the blow. She was prepared for the incredible damage she was about to take. But no, it didn't. All she felt was the ghastly blood splattered on her. The monster froze just a few centimeters away from her and opened its mouth and hissed. It looked like it was already dead. The monster's body began to fall, and behind it was a familiar figure. It was Kim. He got there just in time. The guy was smiling. His glove was bloody. He asked the girl, did she hurt herself? He stood firmly on his feet and waited for the next attacks. There were still plenty of monsters left. The next wave, they're coming! A cracking sound was heard. Everyone else prepared themselves for what they would have to fight. Going up against the purifiers for the first time, a mage could become an easy target. These monsters have a tough body, or rather a shell, so it would be hard to break through. The monster pounced on him, but the boy was ready. He adapted his magic gauntlet and prepared to hit it. They are capable of flying at high speeds, making them quite dangerous opponents. He struck right at the monster. They also possess a hard shell, impenetrable even by steel weapons. However, if you look at it from a different angle, you can see the vulnerability. The guy stood in front of the monster and breathed heavily. That's all they have, a hard shell and the ability to fly. They pose no other danger. He held up a loaded gauntlet and prepared to strike. The gauntlet was so hot that it pierced through the monster's shell, crunching and spurting blood in different directions. There was more than one monster left. It was already closing in on the boy and preparing to devour him. His eyes lit up. He prepared to tear them all into small pieces. Soon, it was over. The glove was completely covered in blood. Kim sighed heavily. Who? It had all worked out after all. The monster had been defeated. The magician stood nearby and trembled with fear. Good. As for the rest of yours, that's something that needs to be hurried, though the girl can basically handle them easily. The guy looked to the side and saw how the girl hesitated, and the monster is already flying straight at her, sliding its huge maw. It's dangerous. It would be too late. The guy got ready to come to the rescue. What a fucking mess. But with the acceleration of his boots, he might still make it. The guy tensed up and prepared to run to the rescue. The boots started working at full power. After a second, he pushed himself off the ground, with such speed that the ground beneath his feet began to burn. The boots do their job, after all. He pushed himself off the ground and jumped high up. The guy flew straight at the monster to finish it off with one punch. And lo and behold, his glove pierced through the monster. He made it in time. Now the girl was safe. He stood behind the monster's back, breathing heavily. Barely made it. Now, he smilingly looked at the girl. At this time, it seems he was feeling very proud. Seha looked at him with surprised eyes. What the hell was that? She didn't even notice. The third wave had passed with 30 minutes left until the fourth wave. The guy seemed really exhausted or annoyed. He tried not to look at the girl to avoid triggering her rage. At this time, the girl seemed to be ready to tear him to shreds. It hit her pride. She doesn't forgive such things. She was literally on fire with rage, and the guy was trying to pretend he didn't see anything. If he crossed her eyes, she would do something like that. Okay, I've got to change the subject. They sat around the fire and tried to make casual conversation. He asked the wizard if he had some kind of powerful magic, a begging sign. The man sighed heavily and apologized. It was the only thing he'd managed to learn for the same. He was incredibly embarrassed at this point. However, let Kim listen. He said something about being a magical engineer, faithful begging sign. The guy nodded his head. But his speed is faster than a knight. The guy was embarrassed and said that it happened. Suddenly, the knight intervened in the conversation. It seems he was already feeling relatively normal. He suggested that everyone try their best. Despite the fact that the prospect is not rainbow, they are strong guys, so there is nothing to worry about. The man laughed. It didn't make it any better. Let's be honest, everyone gave him an ironic look. He was the first one to pass out. The fourth wave was 2 minutes away. Almost time. We should get into position. The guy smiled. The knight kept talking. This time there will be 8 purifiers, but it seems to be nothing to them. The mage standing next to him said through gritted teeth, "Yes, just like he said, there will be 8. On both sides." The man shivered. He was embarrassed himself. It was frightening to realize that they would be fighting such creatures, and there would be so many of them. They stood in a circle, each defending his side. The guys are prepared. The battle's going to be intense, to say the least. As if the change from monsters to purifiers hadn't happened, but now the number of monsters hadn't doubled but squared. The guy felt like there were more than there should be. It seemed like the administrator didn't really want them to just sweep this floor like this. Guy gritted his teeth. "That asshole. Okay, fuck it. We have to fight." The guy swung his fist and hit one of the monsters. "Okay, if that bastard wants it, he'll get it." Everyone started fighting. The girl fought like a beast. She tore the monsters apart. At this time, the knight who was bragging the most was just running away from the monsters in fear like a child. Everyone looked at him with rage. What kind of brute is this? However, he didn't seem to feel guilty. Okay, the 4th wave has been passed, and there's still 10 minutes left until the 5th wave. The fire was crackling as the people were trying to recover from such a heavy fire. The expression on people's faces is quite depressing. They seem to be scared as hell. They're probably imagining what's in store for them in the 5th wave. 16 squared is 256 purifiers. That's a whole fucking army. Indeed, those things were already approaching, and they were simply huge in number. The sorcerer sighed. He's going to lose his mind. The spectators complained to the administrator, but their complaints went unheeded. Of course, who would doubt it? Suddenly, the knight became animated and shouted at the mage, "What did he say? Why is he fucking yelling at him? What am I supposed to do with this?" The sorcerer was furious. There was only 26 seconds left until the 5th wave. Kim was preparing himself for what he was about to face. There were going to be huge waves of monsters now. What was expected, this was the only way. The guy shivered. He really didn't want to resort to this, but there seemed to be no choice. He got to his feet and went to the knight, who by then had recovered and did not understand anything. The guy, in a serious voice, told everyone to move away and lie down on the ground. Everyone stared at him with an uncomprehending look. The guy started to charge his glove. Let them listen to him if they want to live. Sure. Everyone looked at him with surprise. The 5th wave was coming. He could already hear the stomping and the chattering of those things, and his gauntlet began to charge more and more. It was completely covered with blue light, and a beam of energy was about to burst out of it and burn everything. The girl tilted the knight's head so he wouldn't have to look, but the poor guy only managed to grunt. There was a rumbling sound. A bright beam of blue energy burst out of there and went straight into the midst of those monsters. There was a rumbling sound. Kim could hardly stand on his feet. He felt himself being pushed backwards. His legs could hardly hold him up. However, the boy did not give up. He used his skill, and his sneakers literally burrowed into the ground, so the guy was able to slow himself down at least a little. The recoil is too strong. He won't last long. His eyes opened even more. The guy could hardly hold on. He realized that he had to finish all these things off in one blow, otherwise this scum wouldn't let them live in peace. Swinging his arm, he intensified his wave even more, even though it was a crazy tension, but he kept shooting. Everyone stood and looked at him in a daze. The bugs started to vaporize one by one. The immense temperature was literally dissolving them. In a second, it was over. Only ashes remained where the explosion had been. The army of beetles had vaporized. The mage was shocked. All the purifiers in one blow. He couldn't believe something so powerful existed. Seiha walked up to him stunned. Who the hell is this guy? It didn't make any sense. He stood there, and with his back turned to them, he didn't say anything. They all looked at him like they were mesmerized. It was an amazing sight. Kim took off his glove and threw it on the floor. The glove's time was up. It was worth a little rest. The guy had overdone it, and so much so that his strength was almost gone. He started spitting blood, coughing and filing to the ground. There was admiration in the chat room. The Emperor had done everything. He had spent too much magical power, much more than he had planned. The guy looked at his bloody hand. That sucked. Yes, he had placed a magic stone in the glove, but unfortunately, it wasn't enough. It took all of his magical powers to strike. Without the blessing, he would have passed out before he killed anyone. However, everything went perfectly. The test was completed, and the way to the 7th floor was open. There was complete admiration in the chat room. The girl approached him with timid steps. She was still even a bit afraid of him. She addressed him by calling him uncle. The guy looked at her with surprised eyes and wiped blood from his face. He seemed to have overdone it. The mage and the girl approached him. They seemed extremely concerned. The guy said that everything was fine. The girl didn't have much faith in that, though. If he was fine, he wouldn't be coughing up blood, so that sucks. He was picked up under the arms and dragged. The boy fought back and shook his head. He's really okay. It's just a side effect of the depletion of magic power. Magical engineers use magic too. The man who was holding him nodded, I see. He turned to the girl and called her apprentice and told her not to worry. The girl was furious at such nicknames. Just when she heard that he thought she was worried, she immediately looked away and snorted. The banter started almost immediately, and the audience loved it. The guy was asked again, "Is he okay?" He continued to say he was fine and not to worry. The user sponsored him with 500 coins and asked, "Who the hell is he anyway?" The guy said he would check the reward first and they could move on. The portal had already opened, by the way. However, everyone was standing in their seats. What's the big deal? The portal is open, the test is passed. Why are they here? The knight started to speak but was interrupted. The man's voice was still weak. The schoolgirl approached the Kim and turned to him. The guy looked at the girl with surprised eyes. What was she even up to? The girl started to take off her gas mask. She removed the mask from her face, and it turned out that under this mask was quite a beautiful girl. The girl repeated her question. Is she actually talking to him? What's his real name? As soon as Kim heard that question, he was immediately confused. Really? Why is she talking to him? He said his name. What's wrong with that? The girl shook her head. No, that's bullshit. The people on her stream say that name isn't on the list.